The biggest, most feared man in the whole Montana Valley dropped to his knees on a stranger's porch and wept like a broken child. Clara Whitmore had a rifle in her hands and every reason in the world to slam the door. Instead, she watched a man twice her size shake with grief no gun could cause. And what he whispered next changed everything. Before we go on, if stories about second chances and quiet, stubborn kindness move you, subscribe and stay with me to the very end. And tell me in the comments what city you're watching from so I can see how far this story travels. The knock came 3 times, and each one sounded like a man trying to be gentle with a fist that had never learned how. Clara Whitmore set down her needle and did not move. It was near midnight. Rain had been coming down hard since supper, drumming the roof in that steady way that usually made her feel safe and alone, in the good way, the earned way, the way a woman learns to feel when she has decided the whole world can go on without her. Now that same rain sounded like something covering up footsteps. The knock came again. "I hear you," she called, and she was pleased her voice did not shake. "State your business or move along." A voice answered through the door. Low, careful. The kind of voice a man uses when he already knows he frightens people and has spent his whole life trying to shrink it down. "Ma'am, I don't mean you no trouble. My horse went down in the creek. I got hurt. I saw your light." Clara reached for the rifle by the hearth without taking her eyes off the door. "Lots of men see a woman's light and decide it means something it don't," she said. "Yes, ma'am. I reckon that's true." A pause. "You keep that door shut then. I'll sit out here on the step till the rain lets up. I won't lay a hand on nothing." That gave her pause. A man with bad intentions did not offer to sit in the rain. "You'll sit on my step," she repeated. "Yes, ma'am." "In this?" "I've slept in worse." She crossed to the window and moved the curtain a half-inch. Lightning went off somewhere behind the ridge, and in that white flash she saw him, and her breath caught hard in her chest. He was enormous, not fat, not soft. He was built like something the mountain had made and forgotten to take back, shoulders that filled the whole doorway, a chest like a barn wall, arms that could have snapped her fence rail without effort. His hat was in his 2 hands, held against his stomach, the way a boy holds his hat at a funeral. His shirt was torn open at one shoulder and dark with something that was not rain. His head was bowed, and he was crying, not making a sound, not asking her to see it. But his shoulders moved once, and the flash caught the wet on his face that had nothing to do with the storm. Clara Whitmore had lived 30 years and buried more of them than she cared to count, and she had learned to read men fast because reading them slow had cost her before. And what she read in that huge shaking figure on her step was not danger. It was grief, old grief. The kind that gets carried so long it stops looking like grief and starts looking like a man. She lowered the rifle a few inches. "You're bleeding," she said through the door. "It'll stop." "Not the way you're holding that arm, it won't." He didn't answer. "What's your name?" The pause was longer this time, and she understood why before he said it. He was deciding whether the name would end the conversation. "Alder," he said. "Alder Hayes." Clara's hand tightened on the door latch. She knew the name. Everyone in the valley knew the name. The women in town lowered their voices when they said it. The men said it louder to prove they weren't scared, which only proved they were. Alder Hayes, the mountain cowboy. The one they told you not to look at too long on the road. The one the preacher had once used in a sermon without saying the name, a warning about the kind of darkness that walks upright and wears a man's shape. She had been in Montana 11 months. She had heard the name Alder Hayes in her first week. "They say things about you," she said. She was surprised she said it out loud. "I know what they say." "They say you killed men." "Some of that's true." She had expected him to deny it, when he didn't. Something in her chest shifted, not toward fear, oddly, but toward a strange, cold respect. A liar would have said no. "And the rest of it?" she asked. "The rest of it?" Alder Hayes said, and his voice went so quiet she had to lean toward the wood to catch it. "Is what men say when they've already decided who you are, and they need it to be true so they can sleep." Clara stood very still. Rain filled up the silence. "Ma'am," he said finally, "you don't owe me a thing. Not shelter, not a kind word, not the trouble of talking to me through your own door in the middle of the night. I'll go. I only stopped because I thought—" He stopped himself. "It don't matter what I thought." "Say it," she said. "I thought maybe if I bled to death out here, it ought to at least be somewhere with a light on, somewhere that looked like a home." A breath. "Foolish thing to think. Good night, ma'am. I'm sorry to have troubled you." She heard him start to rise, heard the great weight of him shift on the boards, heard the small grunt of pain he tried to hide. And Clara Whitmore, who had promised herself she would never again open a door to a man in the dark, opened the door. He was already turning away. He looked back at her, and up close in the lantern light. He was somehow both more frightening and less a face weathered like a canyon wall, a short dark beard, dark brown hair plastered flat, and eyes that were the softest, most tired thing she had ever seen on a hard man. "Get in here," she said, "before you fall down on my step and I have to explain a dead man to the sheriff." He blinked at her. "Ma'am, Alder Hayes. I have a loaded rifle and I have used it, and I will tell you plain, if you give me one reason to regret this, I will not hesitate. Do we understand each other?" Something moved across his face. It took her a second to recognize it because she hadn't expected to see it there. It was gratitude, and it was so raw and so unguarded that she had to look away. "Yes, ma'am," he said. "We understand each other." "Then come in. Mind the low beam. It don't care how big you are."
Shut door.
He had to turn sideways to get through her door, and he ducked so far under the beam that he nearly folded in half. And once he was inside, the whole cabin seemed to have shrunk around him. He stood dripping in the middle of her one main room and held his hat against his chest, and would not sit until she told him to twice. "Sit," she said the second time, pointing at the chair by the fire. "You're making the room nervous." He sat. The chair complained under him. He set his hat on his knee like it was the only thing he owned worth minding. Clara set the rifle within her reach. Not hidden, not pointed. Just plain and honest fact between them, and knelt to look at his arm. "Take the shirt off that shoulder," she said. "Ma'am, I don't think—" "I was going to be a doctor's wife once," she said. "It didn't take. But I learned to stitch a wound before I learned it wasn't going to be my life. Take the shirt off." He did slow wincing, and she saw the gash in his upper arm, deep, long, ragged. "That's not from a fall," she said. He didn't answer. "Alder." "No, ma'am, it's not from a fall." "From what then?" He looked at the fire for a while. "There were 3 men on the North Road," he said. "They knew who I was. They'd had some whiskey, and they'd decided the valley would be better off with one less Alder Hayes in it. I let the first 2 throw their punches. The third one had a knife." He said it all flat-tired, like a man reading out a bill of goods. "I didn't kill them, if that's what you're wondering. I'd have been within my rights, and I didn't. I put them on the ground, and I got on my horse, and I rode, and the creek was up, and my horse went down, and here I am, bleeding on a stranger's good chair." Clara worked as he talked, cleaning the wound, and her hands were steady, but something in her had gone quiet and watchful. "They came after you," she said. 3 of them, because of your name. Because of my name. And you didn't kill them." "No, ma'am." "Even though they came to kill you." He turned his head and looked at her. Then and there was the smallest, saddest edge of something like humor in it. "That surprises you." "Everything about you surprises me," she said honestly. "Hold still. This is going to hurt, and I'd rather you didn't put your fist through my wall." "I'll hold still." She threaded the needle. "Talk to me while I do this. Keeps a man from tensing up. What were you doing on the North Road at night in a storm? Coming down out of the high country. I guide folks through the passes when the weather's bad, and they got no sense to wait for it to clear. Prospectors, settlers. A family last month with 3 little ones and a wagon that had no business on that grade." The needle went in, and he did not flinch, and she was impressed despite herself. Got them all through. Man paid me in a sack of flour and a chicken and told me not to come into town while his wife and daughters were about. So, he shrugged the shoulder she wasn't working on. Fair enough. That's not fair, Clara said. That's cruel. It's the world, ma'am. It's cruel, and men calling it the world don't make it less cruel. It just lets them off the hook for it. She tied off the first stitch harder than she meant to. Sorry, I've got opinions. My husband used to say I had too many for a woman, and not enough sense to keep them behind my teeth. Alder was quiet a moment. Where's your husband now, ma'am, if you don't mind me asking? In the ground outside Cheyenne, she said. 2 years back. Fever took him in 4 days. Took our boy the same week. He was 5. She said it the way you say a thing you've said so many times the words have worn smooth. So it's just me now. Me and this ranch that's falling down around my ears, and a whole town that thinks a woman alone is a problem to be solved. She felt him go still, not the flinch of a needle, a different kind of still. I'm sorry, he said, and she believed him, which was strange because most men who said it were only saying it. A boy. That's... He stopped. There's no words for it. I won't pretend there are. No, Clara said, and blinked hard and went back to work. There aren't. They didn't speak for a while. The fire ate through a log. The rain kept on. She finished the wound, wrapped it clean, and sat back on her heels. There, she said. It'll scar. You've got plenty of company from the look of you. He glanced down at his own arms, at the map of old marks on them, and something crossed his face that she would come to know well in the days ahead. A flinch that had nothing to do with the body and everything to do with the story behind each mark. Yes, ma'am, he said. Plenty of company. She would not let him sleep in the barn. The roof leaks, she said. You'll be wetter in there than out here. You'll sleep by the fire, and you'll be gone by the time the sun's proper up, and if you so much as look at that rifle, You'll shoot me, yes ma'am, you've said. And there it was again, that faint, worn edge of humor so unexpected on that grave face that she nearly smiled back. She gave him blankets. He was too big for them. He arranged himself on her floor with a kind of careful courtesy, folding all that size into the smallest space he could manage, and she went to her own bed behind the curtain and lay there listening, rifle within reach, certain she would not sleep. She slept. And in the morning, the rain had stopped, and the man was gone, and Clara sat up sharp with her heart going fast, sure she'd wake to find something taken. Nothing was taken. The blankets were folded in a neat square on the chair. The floor was swept, he had swept her floor. And through the window she saw him at the far corner of her yard shirt, back on sleeve, stiff with dried blood, working on her broken fence with his bare hands and a rock for a hammer. Clara pulled on her shawl and went out into the wet morning. I told you to be gone by sunup, she called. He straightened and pulled his hat off. Yes, ma'am. I aim to be. He gestured at the fence with the rock, almost embarrassed. This rail's been down a while. Cattle could walk right through. Won't take me but an hour to set it right. Didn't feel proper to eat your bread and sleep on your floor and leave your fence down behind me. I didn't feed you bread. No, ma'am. But you would have. You're that kind. He said it plain, no charm in it, like he was simply naming a color. I could tell soon as you opened the door. Some folks got a hardness on the outside and a hardness all the way through. And some folks got a hardness on the outside because the soft part learned it had to hide. He set the rail. You're the second kind. Reckon that's why the town don't know what to do with you neither. Clara stood there with her shawl clutched at her throat and did not know what to say because no one had said a true thing to her in a very long time. And here was the most feared man in Montana saying one over a broken fence at dawn. You'd best come in and eat before you go, she said finally. You can't fix a fence on an empty stomach. Ma'am, I don't want to be a burden. Alder Hayes. She put her hands on her hips. You are 6 feet of trouble, and you slept on my floor, and swept my house, and you're standing there bleeding through my stitches. You are already a burden. You may as well be a fed one. Come in. He looked at her for a long moment. Then slowly that grave face did something she hadn't seen it do. It almost smiled. "Yes, ma'am," he said. He stayed for breakfast, and then because the fence led to the gate and the gate led to the pen, and the pen led to the leaning wall of her barn. He stayed till noon. And she did not tell him to go, and he did not ask to stay. And somewhere in the middle of the morning, the question of his leaving simply stopped being asked. She watched him work. He worked the way some men pray wholly without hurry, giving all of himself to a small thing, as if the small thing mattered as much as anything ever had. He fixed the gate that had hung crooked for a year. He hauled the water she'd been hauling in 2 trips in 1. He found the loose board on her porch that she'd tripped on 100 times and set it right without being asked or thanked. And when she noticed and thanked him anyway, he looked as startled as if she'd struck him. "You don't have to thank me for that, ma'am." "I'll thank a man for what a man does," she said. "It's not a hard rule to live by. More folks ought to try it." Around noon, she brought him water in the yard, and he drank it down and handed the cup back and stood there a moment, looking out at the ranch at all the work still left, and she saw something settle over him. "I ought to go," he said. "You keep saying that. I ought to keep saying it." He turned the cup in his hands. "Ma'am, I'll be honest with you, because I got a feeling you'd know it if I wasn't. A man like me stays too long anywhere it brings trouble down. Not because of anything I do. Because of what folks decide I've done just by being near. You've got a hard enough road a woman alone out here. You don't need Alder Hayes's shadow laid over your gate for the whole valley to see and talk about." "And what will they say?" Clara asked. "That I let a hurt man out of the rain? They'll say worse than that." "Then they can say worse than that." She took the cup from him. "I have spent 11 months being careful, Alder. Being small, keeping my head down and my opinions behind my teeth and my door shut. And you know what it got me? A leaning barn and a leaking roof and a town that pities me on Sundays and forgets me by Monday. I am done being afraid of what people say. I ran out of the strength for it about a month ago, and I haven't missed it since." He looked at her a long time. "You're a stubborn woman, Clara Whitmore," he said. "I am the most stubborn woman in this valley and possibly the territory," she agreed, "and I'll thank you not to sound so pleased about it." And this time he did smile, a real one, small and slow and clearly out of practice, cracking across that hard, weathered face like sun through a canyon. And Clara felt something in her own chest that she had thought died 2 years back outside Cheyenne. Some small, warm, foolish thing stir once and open one eye. She turned away before he could see it on her face. "There's a stew," she said. "It'll be ready at dusk. If a man happened to still be fixing my barn wall at dusk, I couldn't very well let him ride off hungry." "No, ma'am," Alder said quietly. "I don't suppose you could." It was Mr. Pruitt from the feed store who saw first. He came out the second day with a wagon of the winter's seed she'd ordered on credit, and he came around the bend and saw Alder Hayes up on the barn roof, and Clara watched the man's face go from ordinary to gray in the space of a breath. Pruitt stopped his wagon a good 40 feet off, as if the barn itself might be catching. "Mrs. Whitmore," he called, and his voice was pitched to carry and to warn. Everything all right out here?" "Everything's fine, Mr. Pruitt," she called back. "You can bring the wagon up." "I'll just—" His eyes hadn't left the roof. "I'll leave it here, ma'am. You can send someone for it." "Send who?" "I've got no one." "Bring the wagon up, Mr. Pruitt. It's 100 feet, it won't kill you." Up on the roof, Alder had gone still. He set down his tools slow, and came down the ladder just as slow, and Clara understood he was making every movement large and unhurried, so a frightened man could see there was nothing hidden in them. He came and stood by her well back from the wagon hands, loose and open at his sides, and he took his hat off. "Mr. Pruitt," he said, civil as Sunday. Pruitt swallowed. "Hayes, I'll carry the seat up for the lady," Alder said. "Save your back. You can stay right there by your wagon." And he walked over, keeping wide, keeping slow, and lifted the sacks of seed 2 at a time. Loads that would have taken Pruitt 6 trips, and carried them to the barn without a word. And Pruitt stood by his horses the whole time, with his hand not quite reaching for something under his coat, watching a man do him a kindness, like it was a trick. When it was done, Alder stepped back and put good distance between them again. "Obliged," he said. Pruitt didn't answer him. He turned to Clara instead, lowering his voice, though not low enough. "Mrs. Whitmore, a word." He drew her a few steps off. "That man cannot be here. You don't know folks don't tell a decent woman like you the whole of it, but that man has blood on him. He killed the Dolan brothers. He half-crippled a man in the saloon at Miller's Bend. There's mothers in this valley won't let their children on the North Road because of him. You've got no husband to—" He caught himself. "You've got no one to protect you is my meaning. You cannot have Alder Hayes on your land." Clara looked past him to where Alder stood by the barn hat in his hands, looking at the ground close enough to have heard every word and pretending he hadn't the way. A man learns to pretend when the words about him are said in front of him his whole life long. Something turned over in her hot and clean. "Mr. Pruitt," she said, "did that man just carry your seed so you wouldn't have to— That's not— Did he tip his hat to you and keep his distance and speak to you civil while you kept your hand on whatever's under that coat? Mrs. Whitmore, you don't understand the danger." "I understand it fine," Clara said. "I understand it better than you, I expect, standing this close to it. I've had 2 days of it under my roof. And in 2 days that dangerous man has fixed my fence and my gate and my porch and my barn, swept my floor, and asked me for exactly nothing. You've known me 11 months, Mr. Pruitt. In 11 months you've sold me feed on credit and charged me the interest and never once come out here to see if a widow woman needed a hand with a leaning barn." Well, she let that land. "So you'll forgive me if I put more stock in what a man does over 2 days than what a town says over 2 years. Pruitt's face went from gray to red. "On your head be it then," he said stiffly, and climbed back on his wagon and turned it and did not look at either of them again as he drove away. The yard was quiet after. Alder didn't move for a while. Then he came over slow and stood a respectful distance off, turning his hat. "You shouldn't have done that, ma'am. I'll do as I please on my own land. He'll go back and he'll talk. By supper the whole town'll know Alder Hayes is at the Whitmore place, and they won't say I carried the seed." He looked at her, and there was a terrible gentleness in it. "They'll say I've got you fooled. They'll say worse. And it'll stick to you, Clara. Long after I'm gone up the mountain it'll stick to you, and I can't clean it off no more than I can clean off my own." "Let it stick," Clara said. "You don't mean that." "I mean every word of it." She stepped toward him. She who came up to the middle of his chest, stepping toward the most feared man in Montana, with her chin up. "You want to know what I heard just now? Alder Hayes, I heard a man warn me about the danger, while a scared little feed clerk kept his hand on a gun, and you carried his seed. I have spent my whole life being told who's dangerous by the people doing the frightening. My husband's family told me he was a catch. The town told me I'd be looked after. God himself from that pulpit told me my boy was in a better place." Her voice cracked, and she pushed through it. "I am finished being told. From here on, I decide for myself who's dangerous and who's just been handed a name he never got a chance to put down. And I have decided about you, so you can quit warning me off. It won't take." Alder Hayes stared at her, and then for the second time, the great feared man's shoulders moved and his jaw worked, and he had to turn his face away toward the mountains, because a man who has been called a monster since before he was grown does not know what to do when a woman looks at him straight and calls him something else. "Ma'am," he said when he could rough. "Clara, nobody's—" He stopped, started again. "Nobody's stood up for me since I was 19 years old. I forgot what it—" He shook his head hard once. "I forgot." "Well," Clara said, and her own voice wasn't steady either. "You'd best get used to remembering, because I'm no good at standing down once I've stood up. Ask anyone. Ask Pruitt. Ask." And Alder Hayes laughed a startled, cracked, disbelieving sound, like something long rusted shut breaking loose, and wiped his face with the back of his big hand and put his hat back on. "Yes, ma'am," he said. "I reckon I'd better." That night over the stew, he told her the first true piece of it, not all of it. She would learn later that the whole of it came out only in pieces, and only in the dark, and only after she had proven 100 small times that she would not flinch away from him for the having of it. But that first night over the fire with the barn wall standing straight for the first time in a year, he told her the beginning. "You asked about the Dolan brothers," he said. "I didn't ask," Pruitt told. "You were wondering, though." "I was wondering," she admitted. He turned his spoon in the bowl. "There was a girl," he said, "in town, younger than you, worked at the boarding house cooking, cleaning, whatever they'd give her. Her folks were gone, and she didn't have anybody, and when a girl don't have anybody in a town like ours, the men decide she belongs to whoever's got the nerve to take her." He said it flat, but Clara could hear what the flatness was covering. The Dolans decided, 2 of them, grown men, and one night behind the boarding house they decided to collect. Clara set her spoon down. "I came around the corner," Alder said. "I heard her before I saw. She was saying no. She was saying it plain and loud, the way you'd hope a girl would learn to say it, and they were laughing, because to them her no was part of the game." His hand had closed around the spoon. "I told them to let her go. They knew me. They knew I was big. And they figured a man that big must be slow or stupid or a coward that wouldn't dare cross men with money and family behind them." His voice dropped. "They figured wrong. What happened? I don't rightly remember all of it," he said, "and she believed that too. I remember she got away. I remember making sure she got away. And I remember when it was over, one of them wasn't getting up, and the other one was screaming for the sheriff, and by the time the sheriff came, the story had already changed. In the space of 10 minutes, it had already changed. It wasn't 2 grown Dolans and a girl anymore. It was Alder Hayes, gone wild, half-killed a fine young man from a good family, over nothing, over a misunderstanding, over a girl who... He couldn't finish it. They said things about her after to make it fit, turned her into the kind of girl it wouldn't be a crime to, and she was too scared and too alone to say different, and I was too big and too strange and too easy to be afraid of. So... He set the spoon down careful like it might break. "So that's the Dolan brothers, ma'am. That's what I did. And the funny thing..." His mouth twisted, not a smile. "The funny thing is, I'd do it again. Every time. I'd do it again knowing it cost me the whole rest of my life. Which I expect is exactly what makes me the monster they say I am. Because a man who'd do it again isn't sorry. And folks can't abide a big dangerous man who isn't sorry for the thing they need him to be sorry for." The fire cracked. Clara sat very still, and she was thinking of a great many things, of the girl of the town, of the difference between the danger a man carries and the danger a town needs a man to carry so it won't have to look at itself. But mostly, she was thinking of the thing he'd said last. "You're not a monster, Alder," she said quietly. "You don't know all of it yet. I know enough. You don't." And there was something new in his voice now, something that made the hair stand up on her arms. Something under all the sorrow that she couldn't yet name. "There's more, Clara. There's things about why I was on that North Road in the first place, and why those 3 men knew my name so well, and why I really came down out of the high country in a storm, instead of waiting it out like a man with sense." He looked at her, and the firelight caught his eyes, and whatever was in them made her go cold. "There's a reason trouble's been on my heels these 2 years, and never once caught up. And I got a feeling it's fixing to catch up soon. I got a feeling in my chest I haven't had since I was 19, and last time I had it, a girl got hurt, and a man died, and my whole life turned inside out in the space of 10 minutes. He set his jaw. "I shouldn't have stopped here. I knew it when I saw your light. But I was hurt, and I was tired, and for once in my life I wanted..." He stopped. "Wanted what?" Clara said. "Doesn't matter. Alder Hayes, you have swept my floor and stitched under my own stitches, and told me a truer thing about myself than any living soul in 2 years, and now you'll sit at my table and tell me it doesn't matter what you want. Wanted what? He looked at her for a long, long moment across the small fire in the small room, this enormous grieving man that the whole valley had agreed to be afraid of, and when he answered, his voice was barely above the sound of the flames. "I wanted to know," he said, "just once before whatever's coming comes what it would feel like to knock on a door and have it open." Clara did not trust herself to speak. Outside, far off up where the north road ran along the ridge, something moved in the dark that was not the wind, though neither of them knew it yet, and neither of them heard it. Sitting there in the small warm room, with the barn standing straight, and the stew gone cold between them, and 2 years of the world's cruelty, finally for one single night held off at the door. Clara reached across the table. She put her hand over his, her small hand that did not even cover half of it, and she held on, and she felt the shock go through him, felt the whole huge frame of him go rigid at a touch that meant him no harm, and asked him for nothing. "It opened," she said. "The door opened, Alder. You're not out in the rain anymore. Whatever's coming, it can come, but it'll have to come through both of us now." And Alder Hayes, the most feared man in the whole Montana Valley, looked down at the small warm hand over his and bowed his head, and this time, when his shoulders shook, he did not turn his face away to hide it. He let her see. She held his hand until his shoulders went still, and neither of them said a word for a long while, and it was Alder who finally broke it, because a man that size cannot cry at a stranger's table forever without feeling foolish about it after. "You'll want to eat something," he said, rough pulling his hand back slow like he hated to. "Stew's gone cold. My fault. I talk too much when I ought to just eat." "You don't talk enough," Clara said. "That's your trouble. You've been carrying 20 years of talk with nobody to spend it on." "Maybe." He looked at the fire instead of her. "Or maybe I've said too much already, and come morning you'll wish you never let me in." "Come morning," Clara said, standing to reheat the pot. "You'll fix my well pump, because I heard it groaning yesterday like a dying man, and a person who tells me a thing that true across a supper table has got to earn his keep same as anybody. So don't go planning your leaving before you've earned your stew." He almost smiled again. She was learning the shape of it now, that near smile, the way it started in his eyes a full second before it reached his mouth, like the mouth had to be talked into it. "Yes, ma'am," he said. He fixed the well pump the next morning. He fixed it before she was even properly up, and she came out onto the porch with her shawl and her hair still down, and found him crouched over the thing with his sleeves rolled, and his big hands gone somehow delicate, coaxing the leather washer back into place, and the pump was already drawing clean and steady when she got there. "You didn't wake me," she said. "Didn't need waking. It was a small thing." He stood and wiped his hands on a rag. "Water's good and cold now. You had grit in your line. Old washer'd cracked. It's the kind of thing that gets worse slow, so slow a body don't notice till one day there's no water at all, and you can't recollect when it started going bad." "That's most things," Clara said. "That's most things," he agreed, "and it should have been fine. It should have been an ordinary morning, the two of them, and the good cold water, and the barn standing straight." But Alder had gone still again, the way he did looking off past her toward the road, and Clara had learned in 3 days to read that stillness. "What is it?" she said. "Ryder came up the road in the night," Alder said. "Not close. Stopped at the bend, sat a while, turned back." He said it flat. "I heard the horse. I came out. By the time I got to the gate, he was gone." Clara's stomach dropped. "You didn't say." "Didn't want to spook you over a man who might have just been lost." "Was he lost?" Alder was quiet a bit too long. "No," he said. "A lost man don't stop at the bend and sit. A lost man rides up and asks. That man came to look. And he looked, and he saw what he came to see, and he went back to tell somebody." He turned to her finally, and his face had that terrible gentleness on it again, the one that scared her worse than anger would have. "It started, Clara, same as I told you it would. Pruitt talked, and now folks are riding out at night to see. Is it true? Is Alder Hayes really at the widow Whitmore's place? And when they've all seen it's true, then they've seen it," Clara said harder than she felt. "So what? A man fixed my pump. Let them ride out and see it." "You know it's more than that to them." I know it's less than that to me, she snapped, and mine's the only opinion that governs on this land. But her hands had gone cold, and he saw it, and he had the decency not to say so. They didn't have long to wonder who the rider had been. It was near noon when the second wagon came up the road. Not Pruitt's, a finer one, black with a matched pair of bays that had never known a hard day, and Clara knew the rig before she knew the man, because there was only one rig like it in the whole valley, and it belonged to Thomas Crowley. "Get in the house," Alder said low. "I will not." "Clara, it's my house and my land and my road he's driving up," she said. "I'll not hide in my own kitchen from a man in a shined-up buggy. Now stand there and be still, and let me handle him, because I have been handled by better men than Thomas Crowley, and I know how it's done." Alder looked at her, and whatever he saw made him close his mouth and step back and take his hat off and hold it. And she felt the warmth of that he trusted her enough to let her stand in front of the danger, even when every inch of him was built to stand in front of it himself. Crowley reined the bays at the gate. He did not get down. He was a handsome man, in the way. Expensive things are handsome, everything about him clean and pressed and pleased with itself. And he looked at Clara, and he looked past her at Alder, and something moved behind his eyes that was quick and cold and gone. "Mrs. Whitmore," he said, and tipped his hat, and his voice was warm as summer. "I hope you'll forgive the intrusion. I've been meaning to call on you for months. A woman alone out here, it weighs on a man's conscience knowing his neighbor's struggling and not lending a hand." "That's kind," Clara said. "You could have lent it any time these 11 months. The barn's fixed now, though, so you needn't trouble." Crowley's smile did not move, but something behind it did. "So I see. You've had help." His eyes went to Alder again, longer this time. "Hayes. Crowley." Alder's voice was flat as slate. "I confess I was surprised when I heard." Crowley turned back to Clara, and his voice dropped into a register of tender concern that made her skin crawl for reasons she couldn't yet name. "Mrs. Whitmore, I don't know how much you know about this man, and I don't say it to frighten you. Lord knows a widow's got frights enough. But I'd be no kind of neighbor, no kind of Christian, if I let you go on in ignorance of the danger under your own roof. I know he killed the Dolan brothers," Clara said. "I know he half-crippled a man at Miller's Bend. I know mothers keep their children off the North Road. I've heard it all, Mr. Crowley. Pruitt made sure. So you can save your breath and your conscience both." Crowley blinked. He had come loaded for a frightened woman, and he'd found a loaded one instead, and it threw him half a step. But only half. "Then you know," he said slowly. "And you've decided to keep him anyway." "Well," he gathered his reins. "That's a brave thing, ma'am. Brave or foolish, and out here they've a way of looking alike right up until the end." He looked at Alder one last time. "You know, Hayes, I've often wondered if you'd ever land somewhere. If some soul would ever be soft enough or lonely enough to take you in. I confess I'm glad to see it. It'll make things simpler having you in one place." And there it was, the cold thing behind the eyes out in the open for just a breath before the warm summer smile came down over it again. "Good day, Mrs. Whitmore. My offer of help stands. Should you ever find yourself in need of a friend, a safe friend, my door's open." He clucked to the bays. "It won't always be a good day out here. Weather turns fast in these mountains. Remember I said so." And he drove off unhurried, the fine wheels turning smooth in the ruts, and Clara stood there with her heart going hard and did not understand yet why a man saying such civil words had left her feeling like she'd been threatened at knife point. She turned to say so to Alder. The look on his face stopped her cold. He was staring after the buggy, and every bit of the gentleness was gone, and what was left underneath it was a thing she had not seen on him yet. Not grief, not shame, not that worn patience. It was fear. Alder Hayes, 6 feet of trouble the whole valley trembled at, was watching Thomas Crowley's buggy roll away down her road, and he was afraid. "Alder," she said. "What is it? What just happened? Talk to me." He didn't answer for a long moment. "You know him," Clara said. It wasn't a question. "You knew him before today. This isn't about the Dolans at all, is it? This is something else." "Alder." She grabbed his sleeve, made him look at her. "Talk to me." And Alder Hayes turned to her, and the words came out of him low and terrible. "That man," he said, "is the reason there was ever a story about the Dolans at all." The world seemed to go very quiet. "Sit down," Clara said. "No, come inside. Come inside and sit down, and you tell me the whole of it right now, all of it, no more pieces in the dark. If that man's going to bring the roof down on both our heads, I'll have the whole truth first, so I know what I'm standing under." He came inside. He sat. He turned his hat in his hands a long while, and Clara waited because she had learned that too, that you did not rush a truth out of Alder Hayes. You set a chair by the fire, and you waited, and eventually the weight of it came out on its own. "The girl," he said finally. "The one behind the boarding house. The one the Dolans came to collect." He looked up. "Her name was Ellen, and she wasn't nobody, Clara. That's the part the town needed to forget. She wasn't some orphan with no people. She had one person left in the world who'd promised to look after her." He drew a breath. "Her sister's husband. A man who'd taken her in when their folks died, and then decided when she got old enough that taking her in gave him rights over her. And when she wouldn't, when she ran off to the boarding house to get away from him, that man is the one who sent the Dolans." Clara's hand went to her mouth. "Crowley," she whispered. "Thomas Crowley." Alder said the name like it cost him something. "The Dolans worked his land. They did his collecting. And when Ellen ran, he sent them to bring her back. Not to kill her, not that night, just to frighten her back into place, to remind her what a girl alone is worth in this valley. And I came around the corner and spoiled it. I put one Dolan in the ground and broke the other, and I got Ellen onto a coach headed east before Crowley even knew she'd slipped him." He turned the hat. "And Crowley couldn't very well stand up in front of the whole town and say that man ruined my scheme to drag my dead wife's little sister back to my bed. So he made it the other story. The one everybody knows. Wild Alder Hayes killed a good young man over nothing. He had the money, and the family, and the friends to make it stick, and I had my size and my quiet, and nobody in the world to speak for me. And it stuck. His jaw worked. It stuck so good that I half believed it myself after a while. That's the thing folks don't understand about a lie that big. It don't just fool the town. Given enough years, it fools the man it's told about, too. There were nights, Clara, I couldn't rightly remember if I was the man who saved Ellen or the monster who killed a boy for sport. That's how good he made it." The fire popped. Clara sat with her hands knotted in her lap. "Where's Ellen now?" she asked. "I don't know. East, I hope. Safe, I hope. I never heard from her again, and I never wanted to. Any letter she sent might have been the thread Crowley pulled to find her. Better she forgot me. Better she forgot the whole of it." He set the hat aside. "But Crowley never forgot me. 2 years, Clara. 2 years he's kept the story alive, kept the town scared, made sure no soul in this valley would give me work or a bed or a kind word. He couldn't kill me outright, too many folks watching, and a dead Alder Hayes might make somebody ask questions the live one never got the chance to. So he did worse. He made me a ghost, a man everybody sees and nobody helps. He drove me up the mountain, and he kept me there alone for 2 years, and he was content. Clara, he was content to let me rot up there slow." He looked at her, and his voice broke for the first time. "Right up until today. Right up until he drove up your road and saw I wasn't alone anymore." And Clara understood then all at once the cold thing behind Crowley's smile. "That's why he was pleased," she said, sick with it. "It'll make things simpler having you in one place. He's glad you've stopped moving. He's glad you've got—" She couldn't finish. "Got something to lose," Alder said quietly. "Yeah. For 2 years I had nothing he could take. A man with nothing is hard to hurt. But a man with a roof he's fixed, and a woman he stopped himself hard. A man with something to lose is easy. And I walked right into it. I knew better, and I was tired and lonesome, and I saw your light, and I walked right into the one trap 2 years of running never sprung." He stood up fast, the chair scraping. "That's why I have to go, Clara. Now. Today. Before he's had time to make his next move. If I'm gone, if I'm back up the mountain, and you're just the widow who nursed a stranger one rainy night, Maybe he lets it lie. Maybe there's nothing here worth his trouble. But if I stay... Sit down. Clara. I said sit down, Alder Hayes. He didn't sit, but he stopped. 2 years he's kept you a ghost, Clara said, standing to face him. 2 years alone up a mountain, believing the lie so hard you couldn't tell your own self from the monster he made. And your grand plan, now that somebody's finally opened a door to you, now that there's finally one person in the whole territory who knows the true story and believes it, your plan is to run back up the mountain and be a ghost again. To hand him exactly what he's wanted for 2 years. To disappear. To keep you safe. I don't want to be safe. It came out of her louder than she meant, and it startled them both. She pressed on before her nerve went. I have been safe for 2 years, Alder. Safe and small and alone. I have been so safe, I've near disappeared myself. And I'm telling you, it's not living. It's just a slow kind of dying that lets you keep your skin. She was shaking now. You want to know the truth of it? Before you knocked on my door, I'd stopped fixing things. Did you notice that the barn, the fence, the pump, I'd stopped? Because fixing them meant I meant to stay, and I couldn't work out anymore why I'd want to. And then a man twice my size came bleeding out of the rain, and inside of 3 days, he'd fixed every broken thing on this place, and me along with it without even knowing that's what he was doing. Her voice cracked clean through. And now you want to leave. You want to fix everything and then leave. Well, I won't have it. I have buried a husband, and I have buried a son. And I am done. Do you hear me? Done burying the people who matter to me, and I'll be damned before I stand in this doorway and watch one more of them walk off up a mountain to die alone rather than let me stand beside him. The room rang with it. Alder Hayes stood there, this enormous man, and looked at her like she'd knocked the wind clean out of him, and when he spoke, his voice was barely there. People who matter to you, he repeated. Yes. I've known you 3 days. I've known men 30 years who never once told me a true thing about myself, Clara said. You did it over a fence at dawn. Time's not the measure of it, Alder. It never was. You know that. You've been alone long enough to know that. He shut his eyes. If I stay, he said, he'll come for this land. He'll come for you. He'll use every dirty tool he's got, and he's got a whole valley of them, and you'll lose things, Clara. Standing in safety, and maybe more. He doesn't fight fair, and he doesn't ever stop. I've watched him work for 2 years. I know what he is. Then teach me, Clara said. Teach me what he is, because I'm not fighting him alone, and neither are you not anymore, and I'd rather lose everything I've got standing next to you than keep it all standing here by myself. She held out her hand, the same small hand from the night before. Don't run, Alder. I'm asking you. Whatever's coming, let it come through both of us. You said it yourself last night. You said the words. Did you mean them or not? For a long moment, he looked at the hand. And then that enormous man crossed the little room and did not take her hand. He took her whole self, gathered her up against that chest like a barn wall. Careful, so careful, like she was made of glass and grief, and the only thing left in the world worth being gentle with. And Clara felt his heart going like a hammer under her cheek, and felt the shudder pass through him, and neither of them said anything at all, because there was nothing left that needed saying. I meant them, he said finally into her hair. God help me, I meant every one. Then it's settled, Clara said muffled against him, and she was crying now too, and neither of them cared. You're staying, and we're going to beat him. I don't know how yet, but we are, he agreed. And she felt the moment his fear turned into something else, felt it in the way his arms tightened. Not desperate now, but sure, the arms of a man who has finally, after 2 years of running, decided to stand still and be found. We are Clara. They didn't have long to hold on to it. Because Thomas Crowley did not waste time, and his next move came before the week was out, and it came wearing a badge. Sheriff Bell rode up the road 3 days later, and he was not alone. There were 2 men with him that Clara didn't know. Hard-faced men who sat their horses the way men sit them when they're being paid to look dangerous, and Bell himself looked like a man doing a job he'd rather not. Mrs. Whitmore, Bell said, And he did not tip his hat, and that told her which way the wind sat before he said another word. "I've come about the note." "What note?" "The note on this land." Bell drew a paper from his coat. "Your late husband borrowed against this ranch. $200 near enough at a hard rate. You've been paying the interest. I'm told Pruitt's carried it on his books. But the note's come due in full. Principal and interest. It's been bought up and the new holder's calling it." The ground seemed to tilt under Clara's feet. "That's not—" She caught herself steadied. "There was no note. Ambrose never— He'd have told me. He told me everything. There was no note against this land." "There's a note," Bell said, "and there was something almost apologetic in it. And it's got his mark on it, and it's legal, and it's been bought, and it's called. You've got 30 days, Mrs. Whitmore. $240, or the land goes to the holder." He held the paper out. "I'm sorry, I truly am. But it's the law, and it's my job to serve it." Clara took the paper with a hand she was proud didn't shake. She looked at the mark at the bottom. It might have been Ambrose's. It might not. She had no way on earth to prove either, and they both knew it, and that was the whole of the trap laid bare. "Who bought it?" she said. "The note. Who holds it?" Bell's jaw tightened. "Who holds it, Sheriff?" "Thomas Crowley," Bell said. "Bell." And behind her, Clara heard Alder let out a breath. A low, slow, terrible breath. The breath of a man watching a thing he'd predicted come true anyway. $240, Clara said, in 30 days. That's the figure. And if I had it, if I brought that man his money, all of it in 30 days, the note's cleared. The land's mine free. Bell hesitated, and in the hesitation, Clara saw the shape of the second trap under the first. "That's how a note works, ma'am," Bell said carefully. "In the ordinary way. But there's nothing ordinary about this one," Alder said, stepping up beside her at last, and the two hard men on their horses shifted, and one let his hand drift toward his hip. Alder didn't so much as glance at them. He was looking at Bell. "Is there, Sheriff? You know it and I know it. Crowley doesn't want the money. He wants the land, and he wants her off it, and he wants me watching when it happens. So even if she brings the 240, there'll be some reason it's not enough. The rate'll have changed. There'll be a fee. A paper'll go missing. Ain't that so?" Bell didn't answer, but he didn't meet Alder's eyes either, and the not answering was answer enough. "You're a decent man, Bell," Alder said quietly. "I always thought so, even when you looked the other way these 2 years. So I'll ask you plain man to man, and you can lie to me if you have to. Did you know when Crowley made you sheriff, did you know what he was? Or did you find out slow, the way a body finds out about grit in the well, so slow you couldn't say when it started going bad?" And something crossed Bell's face that was almost worse than cruelty. It was shame, the deep, tired shame of a man who's known for a long time that he's on the wrong side and hasn't found the nerve to get off it. 30 days, Mrs. Whitmore," he said, not looking at either of them, and he wheeled his horse, and the two hard men wheeled theirs, and they rode off down the road. Clara stood holding the paper. "He'll never take the money," she said. It wasn't a question anymore. "No," Alder said. "He won't. So the 30 days is a show for the town. So when he takes the land, it looks legal, looks fair. The widow couldn't pay her honest debt. Poor thing, nothing to be done." Alder's hands had closed into fists at his sides. "That's how he does it, Clara. That's how he's always done it. He never does a wrong thing. He just arranges the world so the wrong thing looks like the only right one left." Clara looked at the paper a long moment. Then she folded it slow and put it in her apron pocket, and when she looked up, her eyes were dry and something in them had gone hard and bright. $240, she said. "Clara, I have $40 and some silver put by. I have a milk cow and a plow horse and a wagon. I have this year's seed in the ground that Pruitt just delivered on credit I now can't pay." She was ticking it off on her fingers, cold and clear. "It's not enough. I know it's not enough. But you said it yourself, Alder. He's counting on it not being enough. He's counting on the widow being too poor and too alone to make a fight of it." She lifted her chin. So we make a fight of it. We get the money. All of it honest in front of the whole town. So there's no reason on God's earth for him to refuse it. And when he refuses it anyway, when he changes the rate, or loses the paper, or does whatever crooked thing he's going to do, he does it in front of everybody. He does it where they can see. And maybe Alder, maybe. For once in 2 years, somebody in this valley looks at Thomas Crowley doing a wrong thing and can't unsee it. Alder stared at her. That's the play, Clara said. That's how we beat him. Not with your fists, not with a gun. We can't outmoney him, and we can't outgun him, and we can't outlie him. But we can make him show himself. We can hand him the money in the light and make him choose right there in front of God and the town, between his mask and his prize. And a man like that, a man who's spent 2 years never once doing a wrong thing where folks could see maybe he can't do it. Maybe when it comes to it, the mask matters more to him than the land. And if it does, we win. And if it doesn't, she took a breath, then at least they see. At least this valley finally sees. For a long moment, Alder didn't speak. Then he said very quietly, "You're the most dangerous person I've ever met, Clara Whitmore, and I've met the Dolans." Was that a compliment? The highest one I've got. And there it was, the near smile, though it was grim now, a fighting man's smile. $240 in 30 days, in front of the whole town. He nodded slow, and she watched 2 years of running finally fully burn off him, watched the ghost turn back into a man with his feet planted. All right, Clara. Let's go find your money. And let's make that son of a snake stand up in the daylight." But finding $240 in a valley where every soul had been taught to fear you was its own kind of mountain, and they had 30 days to climb it, and Thomas Crowley was not a man who left even a single day to chance. The first blow came the very next morning. Clara went to the pen to milk the cow, and the cow was gone. So was the plow horse. The gate stood open, not broken, not forced, just opened in the night, quiet by someone who'd known exactly which animals to take, and exactly how much their loss would cost. She stood at the empty pen, and felt the fear rise up, and she pushed it down hard. "Alder," she called level as she could make it. "The stock's gone." He came at once, and he looked at the open gate, and the churned mud, and he crouched and read it the way he read everything, and when he stood, his face was grim. One rider led them off slow so they wouldn't fuss, went east. He didn't have to say toward whose land east was. Crowley's telling us something. He's telling us he can reach onto this land any night he pleases and take whatever he likes, and there's not a thing the law will do about it because the law's his. He looked at her. He's trying to scare you off before the 30 days is even up. Save himself the trouble of the show. Well, Clara's voice was very steady, and it cost her everything to keep it there. Then he's misjudged me. Same as Pruitt did. Same as my husband's family did. Same as every man who ever looked at a quiet woman and mistook the quiet for weakness. She turned from the empty pen. A cow and a horse. Fine. We're down a cow and a horse, and we're still standing here. What's next, Alder? You know how he works better than anybody alive. So tell me, what's his next move, and how do we be ready for it before it comes? And Alder Hayes looked at this woman standing dry-eyed at her plundered pen, refusing to be frightened, refusing to run, and something in his weathered face broke open with a feeling too big to be called anything so small as love. His next move, Alder said slowly, is the town. He'll turn the town against you harder than it already is, so that when you go looking for that money, there's not a door in the valley that'll open to you. He'll make it so no soul dares lend a widow 40 cents for fear of what Crowley thinks. He'll starve you out of the money before you can even start to gather it. He set his jaw. So we don't wait for that. We go into town today. Now. Before he's had the chance to poison it any further. We go in and we hold our heads up and we start asking out loud in the open and we make him chase us instead of the other way round. Into town, Clara said. With you. With me. He said it steady, but she saw what it cost him. I haven't walked into that town in 2 years, Clara, Last time I did men cross the street, women pulled their children indoors. The barber wouldn't cut my hair and the doctor wouldn't look at a break in my hand, and I walked out the far end of that town knowing I'd never walk into it again, as long as I lived. He picked up his hat. But you can't do this alone, and I'll not send you in to do the dangerous part while I hide up here where it's safe. Not anymore. Those days are over. He set the hat on his head. If we're going to make Crowley stand up in the daylight, then I reckon it's past time I did too. Clara looked at him a long moment. Then she went inside and got the deed papers and the false note both, and she came back out and stood beside him, and she took his arm deliberately in the open, where anyone riding by could see the widow Whitmore take the monster's arm and hold it like it was the most natural thing in the world. "Then let's go to town," she said. They walked the whole way down out of habit and lack of a horse, and the closer they got, the more Clara felt at the eyes. Word had gone ahead of them somehow, the way it always did in that valley. And by the time they reached the first buildings, there were faces in the windows. And the faces went still when they saw who came walking up the road arm in arm, the widow and the mountain man, bold as brass in the noon light. The street emptied ahead of them, the way Alder had said it would. A woman gathered her children off the boardwalk. Two men stepped back into a doorway. Someone's shutter banged closed. Alder's step never faltered, but Clara felt his arm go rigid under her hand, felt the old dread come up in him, the 2 years of being made a ghost rising like water, and she tightened her grip and said low, just for him, "Head up, Alder Hayes. You've done nothing to be ashamed of. Not one thing. Head up and let them look." And Alder Hayes lifted his head, and he walked up the middle of the town that had made him a monster with a good woman on his arm, and the truth in her apron pocket, and for the first time in 2 years, he did not walk like a man expecting to be struck. They made for the general store, because Pruitt's was the heart of the town's talk, and Clara meant to start where the talk started. But they didn't reach it, because a man stepped out of the shadow of the saloon and into the middle of the street ahead of them, and stopped and stood there, and Clara felt Alder go absolutely still beside her, still as death, still as she'd never felt him. The man in the street was one of the 2 hard-faced riders who'd come with the sheriff, and he was smiling, and his hand was resting easy and plain on the butt of the gun at his hip. "Well now," the man said loud enough for the whole watching street to hear, "if it ain't Alder Hayes, come down off his mountain at last, and he's brought the widow. Ain't that sweet?" He took a step closer, and his smile widened, and his hand didn't leave the gun. "Mr. Crowley thought you might come to town today. He surely did. He said to me, Ned, you keep an eye on the road because I've got a feeling Alder Hayes is done hiding. And here you are." Another step. "Here you are, Alder, out in the open, where everybody can see, just exactly like he wanted." And Clara understood all at once, and far too late, that they had not sprung Crowley's trap by coming to town. They had walked straight into a new one. The man called Ned stood in the middle of the street with his hand on his gun, and the whole town held its breath to see what the monster would do. And Clara felt Alder's arm move under her hand, not toward the man, not toward violence, but the opposite. He was taking his hand off her arm, gently setting her back, putting his own body between her and the street, the way a wall puts itself between a house and the wind. "Ma'am," he said, low, not looking at her, "step back onto the boardwalk." "Alder, please." Just that. And something in the way he said it made her step back, though every part of her screamed against it. Alder walked forward alone. He did not hurry. He kept his own hands loose and open and well away from his sides, out where everyone could see them, empty, and he stopped a good 10 feet from Ned, and when he spoke, his voice carried clean up and down the silent street. "You've got a gun, Ned. I don't. Everybody here can see that. So whatever happens next, they'll have seen it. Remember that." He said it mild as milk. "Now, Crowley sent you to do a thing. What's the thing? Say it out loud in front of all these good folks so there's no mistaking it later." Ned's smile flickered. He hadn't expected the monster to talk. "The thing," Ned said, recovering, "is that you're disturbing the peace. A dangerous man come down off his mountain, walking bold into a peaceable town, frightening decent women and children. His hand tightened on the gun. I'm authorized to take you in, or put you down if you resist. Your choice, Hayes. Authorized by who? You're not the law. Bell's the law, and I don't see Bell. I'm deputized. Since when? Since Crowley said so. And there it was out loud in the open street, exactly as Alder had wanted, the naked fact of it, that a private man's word had become the law, that a hired gun could call himself deputy because a rancher paid him to. Alder heard the small stir go through the watching crowd, the faint uneasy shift of it, and he pressed on it. So Crowley makes deputies now, Alder said loud. Not the county, not a judge. Thomas Crowley points at a man and says, "You're the law." And now that man can put me down in the street and it's legal. That how it works now. He turned slow so the whole street could see his empty hands. You all hear that? You hear how it works now. A man with money says the word, and there's your law. Today it's me standing in the street with no gun. You reckon it stops with me? Shut your mouth, Hayes. Ellen Ross, Alder said. And the name landed in the street like a stone in still water. Ned's face changed, just for a second. But Clara saw it, and she understood that the name meant something to this man, meant more than it should, and she watched Alder watch it too. Ellen Ross. Alder said again, quieter now, but every soul on that street leaned in to catch it. You knew her, didn't you, Ned? You were around 2 years back. You know the name. You know it wasn't the way Crowley told it. He took one step closer. How many of you know it? He turned, addressing the windows, the doorways, the frightened, watching faces. How many of you have wondered these 2 years whether the story about Alder Hayes was ever the whole of the story? How many of you looked at a big, quiet man who never once bothered a soul and thought, that don't add up? That's not the face of a man who kills for sport. How many of you knew and said nothing because saying something meant crossing Thomas Crowley? The street was dead silent. That's what I thought, Alder said. And there was no anger in it, just a terrible, weary sadness. You all knew, or you half knew, which is worse because half knowing lets a man sleep. 2 years you let me be a ghost up that mountain because it was easier than one hard, true word said out loud. He looked back at Ned. So go on, deputy. Do your thing. Put down the unarmed man in the middle of the street in front of everybody. Let them watch. Let them finally see plain as day exactly what kind of law this valley's got now. Maybe that's the word that finally gets said. Ned's hand trembled on the gun, and Clara realized watching that Alder had done something extraordinary. He had walked into a trap meant to make him fight, and instead of fighting, he had turned the whole street into a witness, and now the gunman couldn't fire without proving every terrible thing Alder had just said. Crowley had wanted the monster to lash out. Alder had refused to be the monster, and it had left the trap with no teeth. Draw on me, and you're a murderer in front of 40 people. Alder said softly, just for Ned now. Don't draw, and you go back to Crowley having failed him. That's a hard spot, Ned. I know it. I've been in Crowley's hard spots. But there's a third way, and you know it, and it's the one that lets you sleep. He held the man's eyes. Walk away. Just walk away. Nobody here'll think less of you for not shooting an unarmed man. And maybe it's the first free thing you've done in a long while. For a long, terrible moment, nobody moved. Then Ned took his hand off the gun. He didn't say anything. He couldn't, maybe. He just took his hand off the gun and stepped back, and the breath went out of the whole street at once, and Alder Hayes turned his back on the gunman, turned his back to show he never feared him at all, and walked to the boardwalk and held out his arm to Clara. Come on, he said quietly. We came to town to ask for help. Let's ask. They didn't get to ask, because a voice came from the far end of the street, smooth and warm as summer, and it stopped them both cold. Well now, that was quite a speech. Thomas Crowley came walking up the middle of the street, unhurried in his fine clothes, and he was smiling, and he did not look at all like a man whose trap had just failed. He looked like a man watching a play go exactly as he'd written it. Ellen Ross, Crowley said, savoring it coming to a stop a dozen feet off. You know, Hayes, I wondered how long before you'd say that name in front of folks. 2 years you've held on to it. Your one card. Your one little scrap of truth. His smile widened. Go on. Say it again. Tell them all about poor Ellen Ross and wicked Thomas Crowley. Tell them the whole story. Alder said nothing. Clara felt the wrongness of it, the way Crowley was inviting the very thing he should fear, and it frightened her more than the gun had. You won't. Crowley spread his hands to the crowd. Then allow me. 2 years ago, Alder Hayes killed Sam Dolan and crippled his brother behind the boarding house. His defense, the story he's told to anyone soft enough to listen, and it seems he's found himself a new listener. A glance at Clara, cold and amused. Is that he did it to protect a girl, Ellen Ross, a girl he claims I sent the Dolans to fetch. You did send them, Alder said. Did I? Crowley smiled. Where's Ellen Ross Hayes? Bring her here. Let her stand in this street and tell everyone what happened. Let her name me. Let her name the Dolans. He waited, and the silence stretched, and his smile grew. You can't, can you? Because you don't know where she is. You sent her away, so you say, and you never heard from her again. So there's no Ellen Ross. There's no witness. There's just your word, the word of a killer, against the word of every respectable soul in this valley. He turned to the crowd, warm, reasonable, terrible. I ask you, friends, who sent the Dolans anywhere nobody sent them? 2 men had a disagreement with a violent stranger, and one of them died for it. That's the whole of it. Everything else is a story a dangerous man tells to make himself the hero of his own crimes. And Clara watched sick as the uneasy sway of the crowd, the sway Alder had won with his empty hands and his hard true words, began to swing back. Because Crowley was right about the one thing that mattered in a town like this. There was no Ellen. There was no proof. There was only a big, frightening man's word, and a rich, smiling man's word, and the whole weight of 2 years pushing on the scale. You've no witness, Hayes, Crowley said, almost gently, almost kindly. And that was the cruelest thing of all. You never did. That's why it stuck. That's why it'll always stick. You can make all the speeches you like in the street. At the end of the day, it's your word against mine, and in this valley, my word is worth a great deal more than yours. He tipped his hat to Clara. I'd think hard, Mrs. Whitmore, about whose word you want to be tied to when the 30 days is up. He turned to go. There's a witness. It was Clara who said it. She hadn't planned to. She didn't have one. But she'd heard the trap snap shut in Crowley's voice, heard him walking away certain, and something in her refused to let him have the last word standing up. So she said it, there's a witness, and Crowley stopped and turned back, and the whole street turned with him to look at the widow Whitmore on the boardwalk. I beg your pardon, Crowley said. Clara's heart was going like a drum. She had no witness. She had nothing. But she had learned one thing in 11 months of watching this valley, and 2 years before that, watching her husband's family. And it was this. A bully needs to be certain, and the fastest way to unmake a bully is to make him uncertain, even for a moment, even about nothing. You heard me, Clara said. There's a witness. You stood there just now and told this whole town there's no Ellen Ross. No proof, nothing but Alder's word. You said it real confident, Mr. Crowley. She came down off the boardwalk 1 step into the street, into the open facing him. But you don't actually know where Ellen Ross is any more than Alder does. Do you? You've spent 2 years wondering, 2 years afraid she'd turn up. Because if she was truly gone, truly nothing, you wouldn't have bothered keeping Alder a ghost all this time. You'd have let it drop. Men let true things drop. It's the true things they're afraid of that they keep poking at. She held his eyes. You've been poking at this for 2 years, Mr. Crowley. That's not the behavior of a man with nothing to fear. For one heartbeat, just one, the summer smile slipped, and Clara saw it, and Alder saw it, and here and there in the crowd, someone else saw it too. Then it came back smooth as ever. You're clever, Mrs. Whitmore. I'll grant you that. Clever and brave and entirely mistaken. He gathered himself. 30 days, $240. That's not a story or a witness or a speech. That's a fact, and it's a legal one, and no amount of cleverness pays a note. He tipped his hat one final time. Good day. And this time, he did leave, and the street began to breathe again. And slowly, the faces withdrew from the windows and the doorways, and Clara and Alder were left standing in the emptying street, having won nothing at all, except that a rich man's smile had slipped once in front of everyone, and a hired gun had walked away rather than fire, and neither of those things could be undone. You bluffed him, Alder said quietly as they walked. There's no witness. You bluffed Thomas Crowley in front of the whole town. I did. He'll know it was a bluff by tomorrow. He'll suspect it, Clara said. But he won't be sure. And I watched his face alter. He's not sure about Ellen. He never has been. You said he could never quite kill you outright because a dead Alder Hayes might make somebody ask questions. Well, it's the same thing. He's kept you alive and kept you a ghost because he's afraid of what happens if the true story ever gets a foothold. And a man that afraid of a story, she looked up at him, is a man who can be beaten by one. We just have to find it, the rest of it, the proof, Ellen or something like her. Ellen's gone. I made sure of it. Then something like her, Clara said. Somebody who was there. Somebody who knew. You said it yourself in the street, half this valley half knew. Somebody in this town saw what really happened behind that boarding house, or knows who sent the Dolans, or knows something Crowley spent 2 years making sure stayed quiet. She stopped walking. We don't need Ellen Alder. We need one person brave enough to say the one true word you begged them for in the street. Just one. And as if the words had summoned it, a voice spoke from the mouth of the alley beside them, old and quiet and shaking. I saw. They both turned. An old woman stood in the alley shadow, small and bent her hands knotted in her apron. Clara knew her by sight, the widow Hensley, who kept the boarding house now, who had kept it 2 years back, who had been keeping it the night the Dolans came around behind it. The old woman's face was gray with fear, and something worse than fear. I saw, the widow Hensley said again, barely above a whisper, her eyes darting up and down the street to be sure Crowley was gone. I saw the whole of it, from the kitchen window. I saw them grab that girl and I saw her fight, and I saw you come round the corner. Mr. Hayes and I saw... Her voice broke. I saw you tell them to stop plain as day 3 times. You told them before you ever laid a hand on either one. And I saw Sam Dolan pull a knife on you first. It was self-defense. It was purely self-defense, and the saving of that poor child. And I have known it for 2 years. She was crying now, silent the way frightened old women cry. And I said nothing. God forgive me, I said nothing because Crowley owns the paper on my boarding house, same as he owns the paper on your ranch. Mrs. Whitmore. And he made it real clear, real early, what happens to old women who tell stories he don't like. So I held my tongue and I let you rot up that mountain, and I have hated myself every single day for 2 years. She looked at Alder, pleading. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry, Mr. Hayes. I was a coward. I was an old coward, afraid of losing my house, and I let them make you a monster, and you saved that child's life. For a moment, Alder couldn't speak at all. Clara watched him. Watched the man who'd stood unflinching before a gun, who'd walked bold up the middle of a town that hated him. Watched him come undone at an old woman's apology in an alley. Because it was the one thing 2 years of hardness had left no armor for. He'd been called a monster so long and so completely that hearing one soul say you saved that child, and I knew, and I'm sorry, broke something open in him that no gun ever could. You don't have to be sorry, ma'am, he managed hoarse. You've got a house to lose. I know what that fear is. I'd never ask you to. I'm asking her, Clara said gently. The old woman looked at her. I'm sorry, Mrs. Hensley, but I have to ask, because that girl's life mattered, and Alder's 2 years mattered, and my land matters, and Thomas Crowley has counted his whole life on frightened people staying quiet. Clara stepped toward her, took the old knotted hands in hers. You said you've hated yourself every day. I believe you. I know that hate. I've had my own kind, and I'll tell you what I've learned about it. It doesn't ever ease off on its own. It only eases when you finally do the hard, true thing you've been afraid to do. That's the only cure there is." She held the old woman's eyes. "You don't have to decide now. But there's a thing coming, a reckoning in 30 days or less, and when it comes, if you were to stand up and say what you just said to us out loud in front of the town, it might be the word that breaks him. And Crowley knows it. That's why he's kept you scared. Because your word is the one he's most afraid of. You're not a coward, Mrs. Hensley. You're the most dangerous witness in this valley. Crowley's known it for 2 years. That's why he spent 2 years making sure you'd never dare." The old woman stood trembling, holding Clara's hands, and Clara could see the war in her, the terror of the house against the 2 years of self-hatred, against the small, fierce thing that Clara's words had lit. "He'll take my house," Mrs. Hensley whispered. "He may," Clara said honestly. "I won't lie to you. He may. But he's going to take mine too unless we stop him. And if he takes both our houses because 2 women finally told the truth, then at least we'll have our houses taken standing up. And I'll tell you something else." She squeezed the old hands. "I don't believe he'll dare. Not if it's out in the open. Not if the whole town's watching. A man like Crowley can crush one frightened woman in the dark. But 2 women out loud in the light, with the town looking on. That's harder. That costs him his mask. And I think, Mrs. Hensley, when it comes right down to it, that man loves his mask more than he loves anything. More than the land. More than winning. I watched his smile slip today when I bluffed him about a witness. Imagine what it does when the witness is real." For a long moment, the old woman said nothing. Then she straightened just a little, but Clara saw 2 years of bent-over shame lift a fraction off her back, and she said in a voice that shook but did not break, "When the time comes, you send for me, and I'll say it. I'll say every word of it in front of God and the whole town and Thomas Crowley himself, and let him do his worst." Her chin came up. "I'm 80 years old. What's he going to do, frighten me into an early grave? I've been dying of the shame 2 years already. I'd rather die of the truth." And Alder Hayes, who had not wept in front of the gun, or the town, or Crowley, turned his face away and pressed the back of his big hand to his eyes because an old woman he'd never blamed for a moment had just offered to lose her home to give him back his name. They left town with more than they'd come for, a witness and a promise, and the memory of Crowley's slipped smile, but they left it knowing, too, that they'd shown Crowley their hand. He knew now that Clara would fight. He knew there was a witness he'd have to worry about. He knew Alder had walked into his town and turned his own trap inside out. And Thomas Crowley was not a man who lost a hand and let it lie. The next blow came the way the worst ones always came, not at them, but at someone smaller, someone who'd dared to help. It was 3 days later. They'd spent those 3 days scraping the valley for the money, going door to door, and it was slow and cruel work, because Crowley had done exactly what Alder predicted and poisoned the ground ahead of them. Doors that opened only a crack. Men who might have lent 40 cents to a widow found reasons. And more than once Clara saw the fear in their eyes, not fear of Alder, but fear of Crowley, fear of what the rich man would do to any soul who helped the widow keep her land. They had scraped together $60. They needed 240, and they had 24 days. Then the boy came running up the road at dusk, gasping, and Clara knew before he spoke that something had broken loose. "Mrs. Hensley," the boy panted. "The boarding house. It's you got to come, ma'am. It's Mrs. Hensley." They ran the whole way down. And when they came into town, there was smoke, and there was a crowd, and there in the middle of it was the widow Hensley's boarding house, with its whole backside, charred black and still smoking, the fire beaten out. But the damage done, the kitchen gone, the very kitchen where the old woman had stood at her window and witnessed the truth 2 years before. The old woman herself stood in the street in her nightclothes, being held up by a neighbor, staring at the ruin of the only thing she owned. "An accident," a man in the crowd was saying loud, too loud. "Grease fire in the kitchen. These old places, you know, dry as tinder." "It weren't no grease fire," Mrs. Hensley said. Her voice was thin, but it carried. "My stove's been cold since supper. I banked it myself. That fire started outside at the kitchen wall. I smelled the oil." She turned, and her old eyes found Clara and Alder at the edge of the crowd. and something passed between the three of them, terrible and clear. It started at the kitchen wall, at my window. At her window. The window she'd witnessed from. The window she'd promised to tell the truth about. Someone had set fire to the exact spot, and the message could not have been plainer if Crowley had signed it. I know what you saw. I know what you promised. And I can reach you any night I please. Alder started forward, his face gone dark and terrible, 2 years of held-in rage rising up all at once, and Clara caught his arm. No, she said low and hard. No, Alder, that's what he wants. That's exactly what he wants. He burns an old woman's house so you'll go wild in the street and prove him right. Don't you dare give it to him. Alder stood shaking under her hand. His fists clenched his whole huge frame, trembling with the effort of not doing what every instinct in him screamed to do. She's 80 years old, Clara, he ground out. She's 80 years old, and she offered to help me, and he burned her house down. Her house. The one thing she was afraid of losing, he took it just to warn her quiet, just to warn the whole valley what happens to anybody who helps us. And I'm supposed to stand here and— Yes, Clara said. You're supposed to stand here. Because standing here holding your temper while that old woman's house smokes is the hardest and bravest thing you'll do all year, and it's the only thing that beats him. She turned him to face her, both hands on his arms, now forcing his eyes down to hers. Listen to me. He didn't burn that house to hurt her. Not only, he burned it to hurt you, to break you, to make you into the monster in the street one more time so the whole town remembers to be afraid. Every soul here is watching you right now, Alder Hayes. Watching to see, does the monster come out? And if you go wild, if you so much as raise your voice, Crowley wins tonight completely, and it doesn't matter what Mrs. Hensley saw 2 years ago, or what any of us do in 24 days. Her grip tightened. So you're going to do the hardest thing. You're going to take off your hat, and you're going to go to that old woman gentle as you know how, and you're going to help her. In front of everybody. You're going to be exactly the man Crowley spent 2 years swearing you're not. That's how we win tonight. Not with your fists. With your gentleness right here where it costs you everything to give it. And Alder Hayes looked down at this small, fierce woman who understood the war better than any general, and slowly the shaking eased and the terrible darkness drained out of his face, and he unclenched his fists. He took off his hat. And in front of the whole watching town, the man they called a monster walked to the old woman in her nightclothes and knelt down in the street so his great height wouldn't loom over her, and took her trembling hands in his, and said so gently that those nearby went quiet to hear it, Mrs. Hensley, ma'am, I am so sorry. This is my doing, and I'll not pretend otherwise. And I'm going to make it right. You'll have a roof, ma'am, I swear it to you. You'll come stay at the Whitmore place, there's room, and I'll build your kitchen back with my own hands better than it was, and I'll not rest till it's done. His voice was thick. You offered to help me when you had everything to lose. So now I'm going to help you. That's how it works. That's how it's supposed to work. Kindness for kindness. And no rich man with a match is going to stop it. The old woman looked at him, and her old face crumpled, and she gripped his hands. They wanted me to be too scared to talk, she said, and her voice thin as it was rang out clear enough for the whole street to hear. They burned my house so I'd stay quiet. Well, I'll tell you what it's done instead. She lifted her chin, and tears ran down the deep lines of her face, and she said it louder than an 80-year-old woman should have been able to right there in the smoking street in front of everyone. I saw Alder Hayes save a young girl's life 2 years ago. I saw Sam Dolan pull a knife on him first. It was self-defense, and it was a mercy, and this man is no killer, and everything Thomas Crowley told this town about him is a lie. There, it's said, it's out. Burn what you like. Crowley, you can't burn it back into me now. It's said. The street went utterly still, and into that stillness, into the smoke and the silence, and the old woman's ringing truth came. The sound of hoofbeats, hard, fast, driven, and the crowd turned as one to see a rider come galloping up the road into town. A rider, none of them knew, a rider who hauled up hard in the middle of the street, breathing near as hard as the horse, and looked wildly around at the crowd, until those searching eyes found Alder Hayes kneeling there in the street. "Alder Hayes," the rider called out hoarse and urgent. "I've been 3 days looking for you. I've got a letter. I've come all the way from Denver with a letter, and you need to read it now tonight before that man Crowley does one more thing." The rider swung down, fumbling in his coat. "It's from Ellen. Ellen Ross. She's alive. She's been looking for you for 2 years, same as you never looking for her. Each of you too scared it'd get the other killed, and she's not just alive, Mr. Hayes." The rider pulled out the letter, his hand shaking. "She's coming. She's a week behind me on the Denver road, and she's not coming alone, and what she's bringing with her is going to burn Thomas Crowley's whole world to the ground." Alder took the letter with a hand that would not stay steady, and for a moment he only held it staring at the folded paper as if it might vanish if he breathed wrong. "Ellen," he said. Just the name. He'd carried it 2 years like a stone in his chest, and now it was in his hands on a piece of paper, and he couldn't make himself open it. "Read it," Clara said softly at his shoulder. "Alder, read it." He opened it there in the smoking street, kneeling in front of the whole town, and his lips moved as his eyes went down the lines, and Clara watched his face change, watched it move from disbelief to something raw and cracked and overwhelmed, watched the tears come, and this time he did not turn away to hide them. He just let them fall on the paper while he read. "She's alive," he said hoarse. "She got east. She got all the way to Denver and she married. She's got a family now. A husband. 2 little ones." His voice broke clean through. "She named her boy Alder. She named her son after me, Clara. After the man this whole valley calls a monster. She named her son—" He couldn't finish. Clara put her hand on his bowed head on the dark hair and said nothing because there was nothing to say to that, nothing at all. "What else?" she asked when he could breathe again. "The writer said she's bringing something, coming a week behind. What is it, Alder? What's she bringing that'll burn Crowley down?" Alder read on, and slowly the grief on his face turned into something harder, brighter, more dangerous. He looked up at the rider who stood holding his winded horse. "Who are you?" Alder said. "How'd she find you? Say it plain." "Name's Marsh. I'm a deputy federal marshal out of the Denver office." The man pulled back his coat, and there it was, the badge real and cold, and nothing like the badge Crowley had pinned on Ned. 2 years ago, a woman came into our office half dead off a coach, told a story most folks wouldn't credit, a girl chased out of a valley by a rich man who'd sent hired men to drag her back, saved by a stranger, the whole town, then turned into a murderer. We hear a lot of stories, Mr. Hayes. Most of them we can't do a thing about. He paused. But this one, Ellen Ross, would not let go. 2 years she wrote us letters. 2 years she built her case piece by piece from 300 miles off. And this spring, something turned up that changed it from a woman's story into a federal matter. "What?" Clara said. "What turned up?" Marsh looked at her, then at the ruined boarding house, then out at the watching crowd, and lowered his voice. "The land," he said. "It was always about the land, ma'am. It was never really about the girl. The girl was just a loose thread Crowley couldn't afford. What Ellen figured out, what she spent 2 years proving, is that Thomas Crowley's been buying up notes on ranches all over this valley. Widows, old folks, families that fell behind. Same as your note, Mrs. Whitmore forged. Marks changed rates, notes that came due sudden and got called all at once. He let that land. And the reason he's doing it, the reason he needs this whole valley in his hand, quiet and scared and owing him, is that there's a railroad survey coming through. Federal land grants tied to it. This valley's going to be worth 10 times what it is inside of 5 years, and Thomas Crowley means to own every foot of it before a single soul in it knows why." Marsh's jaw set. "That's not a local matter anymore. Forging land documents to defraud settlers ahead of a federal survey, that's a federal crime, Mr. Hayes. That's the kind of thing that hangs a man, or near enough. And Ellen Ross has spent 2 years gathering the paper to prove it. She's coming with a federal warrant and a marshal's escort and a satchel full of evidence. And she's coming here to this valley to end Thomas Crowley for good." The street had gone so quiet you could hear the last of the boarding house timbers ticking as they cooled. And then from the crowd, a voice. One of the men who'd stood by these 2 years, one of the frightened, silent ones, said low and stunned, "He forged the note on my place too. Called it 2 winters back. I lost 40 acres. And another voice, a woman's, "And mine. My husband never borrowed a dime in his life, and there was a note with his mark on it." And another. And another. The dam Crowley had built out of fear these 2 years, the dam that had held the whole valley silent, cracked all at once in the smoking street, and the truth came pouring through it. Voice after voice, neighbor after neighbor, each one realizing in the same terrible moment that they had not been alone, that the thing done to them had been done to everyone, that the rich man's smile had been over all of them at once. Alder rose slowly to his feet, the letter still in his hand, and he looked out at the crowd finding its voice, and Clara saw the thing she'd waited 3 parts of a war to see. She saw the town stop being afraid. "You hear that, Alder?" she said quietly. "You hear it. I hear it. That's the sound of it breaking. 2 years he built it, and it's breaking in one night." She gripped his arm. "But Alder, listen to me. This is the most dangerous moment. Right now. Because Crowley's going to hear it too. Within the hour, somebody's going to run and tell him the town's turned, and a marshal's come, and Ellen's a week out with a warrant. And a cornered man, a man who spent his whole life certain he'd never lose a cornered man like that, does the worst thing he's ever done. We have to be ready. We have a week. A week until Ellen comes, and Crowley has a week to do something desperate." Marsh nodded grimly. "She's right. I've seen it before. A man who's about to lose everything he's built, he don't go quiet. He'll try to run, or he'll try to destroy the evidence, or—" He stopped. "Or what?" Alder said. "Or he'll come after the witnesses," Marsh said. "The ones close by. The ones he can still reach before the warrant lands. Mrs. Hensley here. And—" His eyes went to Clara. "You, ma'am. You and your land. Because you're the note that started him showing his hand in the open. If Crowley's going down, he may decide he'll have your ranch out of it one way or another before he does. Out of spite, if nothing else. A man like that would rather burn a thing than lose it clean." And as if the words themselves had reached across the valley and touched him, a boy came pelting up the road for the second time that night, and Clara's stomach dropped before he even spoke, because she knew what he was going to say. "Riders," the boy gasped. "Out at the Whitmore place. 4, 5 of 'em. Crowley's men. They come with torches, ma'am. They're at your barn." Alder was moving before the boy finished. "Alder." Clara ran after him, caught his arm. "Wait. Think it's a trap. It's got to be a trap. He wants you to come charging out there alone in the dark, where nobody can see. He's burning your ranch, Clara." Alder's face was terrible. "Everything I fixed. Everything he's burning it. Let it burn." She hauled on his arm with all her weight, and he stopped, though she couldn't have held him if he hadn't chosen to. "Do you hear me? Let it burn. It's boards and nails. It's not worth your life, and it's not worth handing him the last thing he wants, which is you alone in the dark where he can put you down and call it self-defense. He couldn't beat you in the daylight, so he's trying to draw you into the dark. Don't go into the dark, Alder. Don't." Alder stood shaking, torn clean down the middle, 2 years of held rage, and the sight in his mind of the ranch burning against the small, hard hands on his arm and the sense in her words, and it was Marsh who broke it. "She's right, Hayes. And you're not going alone because I'm coming and I'm a federal marshal, and there's a difference between a lone monster charging in the dark and a lawman riding to stop a crime with a monster." He almost smiled. "Beg pardon," with a citizen at his side. "Let him see. It's the law coming. Let him see there's a witness with a badge. That changes everything." He was already swinging up on his winded horse. "And you to the crowd. Half of you have been wronged by this man, same as these folks. You've got horses and you've got lanterns. You coming or you going home to be afraid some more?" For a long moment, nobody moved. Then a man stepped forward, the one who'd lost 40 acres, and said, "I'm coming." And another. And another. And Clara watched the miracle of it, watched the valley that had made Alder a ghost gather itself in the smoking street to ride at his side, and she understood that this, too, was the war being won not with fists, but with the slow, terrible courage of frightened people, finally deciding they'd been afraid long enough. They rode for the Whitmore place in a body a dozen strong and more lanterns, swinging Marsh in the lead with his badge and Alder beside him, and Clara refusing flatly to be left behind. And they came up over the last rise and saw the glow. But it was small. The barn was smoking, one wall alight, but only one, and around it, silhouetted against their own torches, Crowley's men were not spreading the fire. They were standing frozen, staring at the road, at the dozen lanterns, coming at the crowd that was not supposed to come, at the federal badge that was not supposed to be there. Ned was among them. Clara saw his face in the torchlight, saw the moment he understood the whole thing had gone wrong, that the town he'd been counting on to stay scared had come riding instead. "Federal Marshal," Marsh bellowed, standing in his stirrups. "Every man of you stand where you are. You're setting fire to property in front of a peace officer and a dozen witnesses. The first man to run is the first man I chase, and I don't lose 'em." The torches wavered. And then one of Crowley's men threw his down and put his hands up, and another. And the fight went out of them all at once, because they were hired men, and hired men do not die for a rich man's spite, when the tides turned, and a marshal's shouting, and the whole valley's watching. Only Ned stood a moment longer, his hand near his gun, his eyes going to Alder. "Don't, Ned," Alder said, quiet across the yard in the firelight. "You walked away once in that street. You've still got the doing of one free thing in you. Don't trade it now for a hanging. Put it down." And Ned, after a long, long moment, put it down. They beat out the fire together, the crowd, and Crowley's own surrendered men and Alder, throwing water like a man possessed, and when it was done, the barn stood scorched, but standing one wall black, the roof he'd fixed still on, and Clara stood in her yard, among a dozen neighbors, and looked at the ranch that had almost burned, and did not have a single tear to spare for the boards, because she'd finally understood what Alder had been trying to tell her since the first night. It was never about the boards. "You saved it," she said to him low as the neighbors saw to their horses. "You saved it without going into the dark. You held your temper, and you let the law come, and you saved it clean, and they all saw. Alder, they all saw. You saved it," he said. "You held me back. If you hadn't—" He didn't finish. He didn't have to. If she hadn't caught his arm in the street, he'd have ridden into the dark alone, and Crowley would have had exactly the monster he needed, and everything would have gone another way. "We saved it," Clara said. "That's the whole of it, isn't it? That's what we've been learning this whole time. We saved it. Both of us. Neither one alone." And Marsh, coming over with Ned and irons, heard her and nodded slow. "You want to know the thing Crowley never counted on, ma'am? In 2 years of frightening this valley, one soul at a time, he never once reckoned on two of them standing together. That's the only thing he can't beat. He can crush one. He can't crush two who won't let go of each other." He looked at Alder. "That's how you win against a man like that. You already know it. You've been doing it for a week." They took the surrendered men into town under guard that night, and the week that followed was the longest and strangest of Clara's life. A week of waiting of the whole valley, holding its breath of neighbors who'd crossed the street from Alder for 2 years, now stopping by the Whitmore place with a hen, a sack of meal, a shy apology they couldn't quite say out loud. Mrs. Hensley moved into the spare room, and Alder started on her new kitchen the very next morning, and Clara watched the town's opinion turn like a slow tide. Watched a monster become in the space of 7 days, simply a large, quiet man who was rebuilding an old woman's home. And the money got raised. That was the strangest part of all. Because on the 4th day of that week, the neighbors began to come not with hens now, but with coins. $1 here, 5 there. The man who'd lost 40 acres brought 20 and would not take no. "You bluffed him about a witness to save my neighbor's land," he said gruffly to Clara, "when you had none. Least I can do is put up real money now. There's a marshal to see it's spent right." And by the 6th day, there was $240 on Clara's table, raised from a valley that a week before had been too frightened to lend her 40 cents. And Clara looked at it and understood that Crowley had already lost the thing he'd never known he was fighting for, which was not the land at all, but the fear that made the land worth taking. On the 7th day, Ellen came. She came up the Denver road in a coach with a marshal riding either side, and the whole town turned out to see it, and Clara stood on the boardwalk with Alder as the coach drew up, and she felt him go rigid beside her, felt 2 years of grief and guilt and hope come to a head in the man beside her. The coach door opened, and a young woman stepped down. No longer the frightened girl of the story, but a woman grown straight-backed, clear-eyed, with a satchel clutched in one hand and a small boy's fingers held tight in the other. She looked around the town that had made her a scandal and cast her out, and she was not afraid of it, not anymore, and Clara loved her instantly for that. Then her eyes found Alder. For a moment neither of them moved. 2 years stood between them and 300 miles and a lie that had cost them both everything. "Mr. Hayes," Ellen said. Her voice shook. "I've spent 2 years afraid you were dead, afraid I'd got you killed by living. Every night I told my boy about the man who saved his mother. Every night." She let go of the child's hand and crossed the distance and took both of Alder's huge hands in her small ones and looked up at him. "I couldn't come sooner. I couldn't send word, or he'd have found me through it and found you. So I did the only thing I could do from far off. I built the thing that would make it so he could never hurt either of us again. It took 2 years. She lifted the satchel. "It's all in here. Every forged note. Every settler he cheated. The railroad papers. The men who did his forging, 2 of them turned witness for the marshals. It's over, Mr. Hayes. I brought the thing that ends him. I brought it home." And Alder Hayes looked down at the girl he'd saved, grown into a woman who'd saved him back across 2 years and 300 miles, and the sound that came out of him was not a word. It was just grief and joy, and 2 years of loneliness breaking loose all at once. And he bowed his great head over her small hands, and wept openly in the middle of the town, and not one soul in that whole valley called him a monster for it. Clara stood back and let them have it. She was crying too. Everyone was. They arrested Thomas Crowley that afternoon. He did not go the way Clara had half imagined. There was no last desperate stand. No gun, no snarl. Marsh and the Denver marshals rode out to his fine house with the warrant and the satchel of proof, and Crowley met them on his own porch in his pressed clothes, and Clara had come along at the back of the crowd because she needed after everything to see his face when it happened. And what she saw on his face was the thing she never expected. He was not afraid. He was not even angry. He was smiling. "Marshal," Crowley said, easy as ever, as if they'd come for supper. "I wondered how long. 2 years more or less. She's persistent, that girl. I'll give her that." He held out his wrists for the irons without being asked. "You know the mistake everyone makes." He looked past Marsh, found Alder in the crowd, found Clara beside him. "The mistake is thinking a man like me is afraid of losing. I'm not. I've lost before. I'll build again somewhere else, some other valley, some other set of frightened people who'll give me anything if I only make them afraid enough." The irons clicked shut, and he didn't so much as flinch. "The world runs on frightened people, Hayes. It always has. You had 1 good week. You found 2 of them brave enough to stand up. Enjoy it. There'll be 1,000 more valleys full of the other kind." And Clara understood, looking at that smiling, handcuffed man, the last and hardest truth of the whole thing, that Crowley would never be sorry, would never break, would never give them the satisfaction of seeing him understand what he'd done. He'd told Alder as much weeks ago in the street. A man who'd do it again isn't sorry. Crowley was the same. He'd do it all again in a heartbeat, and no reckoning would ever teach him different. But Alder stepped forward then, and he didn't do what the old Alder might have. He didn't answer the cruelty with cruelty. He looked at Thomas Crowley and his irons, and when he spoke, his voice was quiet and almost gentle, and it was the most devastating thing Clara had ever heard. "You're right, Crowley," Alder said. "The world's got no shortage of frightened people. You could find 1,000 more valleys. But here's the thing you never worked out in all your figuring." He glanced at Clara, at Ellen, at Mrs. Hensley on the boardwalk, at the crowd of neighbors who a week ago wouldn't meet his eye. It's got no shortage of the other kind either, the brave ones, the ones who finally stand up. There's just as many of those more maybe, and they were here the whole time, in this same valley under your same boot. You didn't lose because you ran out of frightened people. You lost because you never once believed the frightened ones could stop being frightened. He put his hat back on. That's the mistake, Crowley. Not mine. Yours. You bet your whole life that people don't change. He turned away. You bet wrong. And he walked back to Clara and took her hand and did not look back as they led Thomas Crowley away, still smiling, down the road and out of the valley to a federal courtroom 300 miles off where his money couldn't reach and his smile wouldn't matter. That evening they gathered at the Whitmore place, Clara and Alder Ellen and her boy and her husband, who'd come the long road with her. Mrs. Hensley Marsh, a dozen neighbors, and it was not a celebration exactly. It was something quieter and deeper than that. The feeling of people who've come through a hard thing together and haven't quite believed yet that it's over. Ellen found Clara alone by the well at dusk. You're the one who kept him from running, Ellen said. Marsh told me, every time. In the street, at the fire, every time Crowley tried to draw him into the dark, you pulled him back. You know what you did, Mrs. Whitmore? Her eyes were bright. For 2 years I built the thing that would save his name. But you're the one who saved him. The man. You kept him from becoming the monster they said he was over and over, when it would have been so easy to let go. I could have cleared his name and still lost the man to bitterness. You didn't let that happen. He saved himself, Clara said. I just held the door. No. Ellen shook her head firm. I held a door once too. I said no to the Dolans I ran. I got away. And a stranger came round the corner and made sure I stayed free. That's what a saved life is, Mrs. Whitmore. It's not one person doing it alone. It's someone holding the door while someone else finds the strength to walk through. She took Clara's hands the way Alder had taken hers off the coach. You held his door. He held mine. And someday my boy, my Alder, he'll hold someone's, and that's how it goes on. That's the only way any of it ever gets better. One held door at a time. Clara couldn't speak. Ellen smiled and squeezed her hands and went back to the light and the warmth and her son. And Clara stood alone by the well a moment longer in the last of the summer dusk, thinking of a rainy midnight 3 weeks and a whole lifetime ago, when a huge shaking man had stood on her step and asked without asking, only to have a door open once before whatever was coming came. She heard his step behind her. She knew it now, that step, the careful weight of it. You'll catch cold out here, Alder said. Come inside, Clara. Everybody's asking for you. She turned to him, and she looked up at this enormous, gentle, weathered man, no longer a ghost, no longer a monster, no longer a stranger at a door in the rain, and she thought about all the things she'd meant to say, and found she only needed one of them. You know what I figured out, she said, these last 3 weeks. What's that? That the whole time, I thought I was saving you, holding you back, standing up for you, keeping you out of the dark. The whole time you were saving me right back, and I never even saw it. I stopped fixing things before you came, Alder. I told you that. I'd given up. I was safe and small and half in the ground already. Her voice went thick. And you fixed my fence and my well and my barn, and somewhere in there you fixed me too, and you never once asked for a thing in return. Ellen thinks I saved you, but I know the truth. We were both drowning. We just happened to grab each other. She reached up, she had to reach so far up, and laid her hand against that weathered face. You were never the one who needed saving, Alder Hayes. And neither was I. We were the two people the whole world had thrown away, and we were the only two who could see that the other one was worth keeping. And Alder Hayes, the most feared man in the whole Montana Valley, turned his face into her small hand and closed his eyes, and stood there in the summer dark, letting a good woman hold his face like it was something precious, something worth being gentle with, Something that had, after all this time, finally found the one door in all the world that would open to it and stay open. She held his face in the summer dark for a long moment, and then she took his hand and led him inside, and neither of them spoke of what had passed between them at the well. Some things a body doesn't need to say out loud. Some things just get decided quiet, and both people know it, and that's enough. But the trouble with a thing that gets decided quiet is that the world doesn't always let it stay that way. The first hard morning came 4 days after they took Crowley away, when a stranger in a town suit stepped down off the eastbound coach and asked the way to the Whitmore place. And Clara felt her stomach drop the moment the boy came running to tell her, because she had learned in 3 weeks that a stranger asking for you by name is rarely good news. "Mrs. Whitmore?" The man tipped his hat on her porch, but there was nothing warm in it. "Name's Prentice. I represent certain business interests out of Denver. Interests that were until recently associated with Mr. Thomas Crowley." Alder came around the side of the house at that, drawn by the strange voice, and stood at the corner with his hat in his hands watching. "Crowley's in irons," Clara said. "Whatever business he had, it's finished." "Crowley's in irons," Prentice agreed smoothly. But the notes he held did not vanish when he did. "They're assets, Mrs. Whitmore. Property. And when a man's arrested, his assets get sold to pay his debts and his lawyers." He drew a paper from his coat, and Clara's blood went cold, because she knew that shape of paper now she'd seen it before. "The note on your ranch was purchased at auction last week, by my clients. It's still due. $240 plus the auction fees, which brings it to $310. He smiled thin. "I'm sure you understand. The law doesn't care who holds the paper. It only cares that it's paid." The porch went very quiet, and Clara understood with a sick lurch that Crowley had been right after all, that a man like that never truly loses, because the thing he built outlives him, gets bought and sold and passed along, and there was always another Prentice, another suit, another valley. She had $240 on her table. She did not have $310. And the extra 70 might as well have been 7,000. "That's not a debt," Alder said, stepping forward. "That's a forgery. A federal marshal's got the proof of it in a satchel right now. That note's got a dead man's forged mark on it, and you know it." "Do I?" Prentice didn't so much as glance at him. "I purchased an asset at a lawful public auction, sir. Whatever its origins, I bought it in good faith. That's the beauty of an auction, it launders the paper. Even if the original note was flawed, my client's claim to it is clean." He turned back to Clara. "You have until the end of the week. $310, or the ranch transfers to my clients. And I'd advise you not to place your hopes in the marshal. Federal fraud cases take years. Your week takes days. I'm very sorry." He tipped his hat again and walked back down the road to the waiting coach, and Clara stood on her porch with 3 weeks of hard-won victory turning to ash in her mouth. "He's right, isn't he?" she said low. "Alder, tell me true. He's right. The auction makes it clean. Even with Crowley gone, even with the proof, they can still take it." Alder didn't answer right away, and that was answer enough. "We'll ask Marsh," he said finally. "There's got to be something. There's got to be." $310 by Friday, Clara said. "We scraped $240 out of a whole valley, and it near broke us. There's no more Alder. Folks gave what they had. I can't ask them to give again for a note that isn't even real. I can't go door to door begging a second time." Her voice cracked. "After everything, after all of it. We beat Crowley, and it doesn't matter because Crowley was never the disease, he was just the fever. And the disease is that a piece of paper is worth more than a person, and no marshal in the world can arrest a piece of paper." Alder set his hat on the rail slow, and Clara saw something settle in his face, something that frightened her. "There is one thing," he said quietly. "One thing I've got that's worth money." "What?" "You've got nothing, Alder. You told me yourself a man with nothing is hard to—" "I've got the mountain," Alder said. Clara went still. "My cabin, my land up in the high country, 40 acres of it free and clear, my own name on the deed, no note, No lien, nothing owed. It's the one thing I've held on to these 2 years because it was the one thing that was mine. He picked the hat back up, turning it. It's worth more than $310, Clara. Timberland water on it, a sound cabin. I could sell it by Friday. Marsh knows men in Denver who'd buy it fair. No. Clara said it before she'd even finished hearing it. No, absolutely not. That's your whole life, Alder. That's the one place in the world that was ever yours, the one place they couldn't take from you, the place you went when the whole valley made you a ghost. That's home. I will not let you sell your home to save my ranch. I'd sooner lose the ranch. I mean it. I'd sooner lose it. Clara. No. She was crying now, furious with it. Don't you dare. Don't you dare do the thing you always do. The thing where you'd give up everything you've got so nobody else has to lose a thing. I have watched you do it for 3 weeks. You carried Pruitt's seed. You knelt in the street for Mrs. Hensley. You'd have ridden into the dark alone to save my barn. You are always the one who pays Alder Hayes, and I am done watching it. This is my note and my ranch and my trouble, and you will not sell your mountain for it. Monsieur, Alder looked at her a long moment, and then he did something she didn't expect. He smiled, that slow, worn, out-of-practice smile. You remember what you told me? He said gently, the day Pruitt came with the seed, when I said folks would talk, and it'd stick to you, and you should send me off up the mountain where it was safe. He stepped close. You told me you were no good at standing down once you'd stood up. You told me I'd best get used to remembering how it felt to have somebody stand up for me. He reached out and, careful as anything, wiped a tear off her cheek with his thumb. Well, Clara, I've been remembering. 3 weeks now. And here's the thing I remembered most. I remembered that a home was never the mountain. I sat up on that mountain 2 years in a sound cabin on 40 free acres, and I was the loneliest, most homeless man in the whole territory. That land was never home. It was just the place I went to be nowhere. His voice went rough. You want to know when I first felt like I had a home? It wasn't fixing your fence. It wasn't the stew. It was the night you put your hand over mine at that table and told me whatever was coming would have to come through both of us. That's home, Clara. It's not a cabin. It's a door that opens. And I've already got one of those now, so I don't need the mountain anymore. I never did. I just didn't have anything else to hold on to till you. Clara couldn't speak. Let me sell it, Alder said. Not because you can't save the ranch without me. You could. You'd find a way. You're the most dangerous woman in the territory. You'd find a way. But because I want to. Because for 2 years the only thing I owned was a place to be alone, and I would like just once to spend what I've got on a place to not be alone. Let me buy in, Clara. Let me stop being the stranger you took in out of kindness and start being a man who put everything he had into the same patch of ground as you. That's not me sacrificing for you. That's me finally getting to belong somewhere on purpose. His voice broke. Don't take that from me, please. I've wanted it my whole life and never once had the chance. And Clara understood then that to refuse him was the cruelest thing she could do, that she'd spent so long insisting he stop paying, that she'd nearly denied him the one payment he'd ever wanted to make, the one that wasn't sacrifice at all, but the opposite, the deepest wanting of his heart finally given somewhere it could land. You stubborn, impossible man, she whispered. Most stubborn man in the valley, he said. Possibly the territory. And I'll thank you not to sound so pleased about it. And she laughed even through the tears, because he'd turned her own words back on her, and she pressed her face into his chest, and he wrapped those great arms around her, and it was settled, the second thing that got decided quiet between them and this one, the world would not be allowed to unmake. Marsh handled the sale himself. He knew a lumber concern in Denver honest men, and Alder's Mountain was worth good money, and they paid it fair. And on Thursday, one day before Prentice's deadline, the money came up the road by Federal Courier, and Clara counted out $310 on her table with her hands shaking. But Marsh, watching her count, cleared his throat. There's another thing, he said. Something I've been sitting on till the money was sure. Didn't want to raise your hopes. He drew a paper of his own from his coat. "You remember I told you, this valley's got a railroad survey coming and federal land grants tied to it. That's why Crowley wanted it all." He set the paper down. "Well, the fraud he committed and the fact that he did it to defraud settlers ahead of a federal action, that's not just a crime, Mrs. Whitmore. It triggers something. There's a provision. Settlers who were defrauded of land ahead of a federal survey are entitled to restitution. Federal restitution." He tapped the paper. "Every soul in this valley that Crowley cheated is going to get made whole. The forged notes voided, the lost acres returned, and damages besides paid out of the federal seizure of Crowley's estate." He looked up. "Including you. Your notes void, ma'am. Has been legally since the day the fraud was proven. That auction Prentice bought at, it sold a forged asset. It's void too. It was always void. He was bluffing you same as you bluffed Crowley in the street. He knew the federal ruling was coming and he came to squeeze you before it landed." The room went silent. Clara looked at the $310 on her table. Alder's Mountain turned into paper money. "Say that again," she said slowly. "The note's void. There's no debt. There was never any debt to pay." "There was never any debt to pay," Marsh confirmed. "And Prentice knew it. He came to rob you one last time before the law caught up." He almost smiled. "It caught up, ma'am, yesterday. The ruling came through the Denver office. I've been carrying it in my pocket since morning trying to find the words. You don't owe anybody anything. You never did." And Alder Hayes made a sound like he'd been struck. Because it meant his mountain, his 40 free acres, his sound cabin, the one thing he'd owned in all the world, was sold. Gone. For a debt that had never existed. He'd given up the only thing that was ever his to pay a bill that was a lie. Clara turned to him stricken. "Alder, your mountain. We can Marsh, can we undo the sale, can we?" "It's done," Alder said quietly. He was staring at nothing. "The lumbermen have the deed. It's done." And Clara's heart broke clean in two because she'd let him do it. She'd finally let him make his one glad payment, and it turned out to be for nothing. And now he'd given up his home for a debt that never was, and it was the cruelest joke the world had played in a story full of them, until Alder began very slowly to laugh. Not a bitter laugh. Not the laugh of a man robbed. He sat down heavy in the chair by the fire, the same chair he'd bled in 3 weeks before, and he put his face in his hands, and his great shoulders shook, and when he looked up, he was laughing with tears running down his weathered face. "Don't you see it, Clara?" he said. "Don't you see what I did? You lost your mountain. I gave it away." He wiped his face. "For nothing. For a debt that wasn't real. And a week ago, that would have been the worst thing that ever happened to me. The last thing I owned thrown away on a lie." He stood, and he crossed to her, and he took both her hands. "But it isn't the worst thing, Clara. It's the best thing I ever did in my life, because I finally got to give away the last thing tying me to being alone, and I got nothing back for it. Nothing at all, except that now there's not 1 acre of ground in this whole world with my name on it except the ground I'm standing on. Right here. This one." "Whistle." His voice shook. "I don't have a mountain to run back to anymore. I don't have a place to be nowhere. For the first time in my whole life, the only home I've got is the one with a door that opens and a woman on the other side of it, and I can't run because there's nowhere left to run to." He laughed again, wet and disbelieving. "You spent 3 weeks trying to stop me giving everything away. And the one time you let me do it, it worked out to be the thing that finally made me stay. Don't you see I didn't lose my home, Clara? I burned the boat. I did the thing I was always too scared to do. I made it so I had to stay." And Clara, who had been ready to grieve his mountain with him, found she was laughing too, and crying both at once. And she understood at last the shape of the whole thing, that Alder Hayes had spent his life owning a place to be alone, and had finally traded it by accident for the one thing he'd never had the courage to want on purpose, no way out, but forward. "You impossible man," she said for the second time. "You keep saying that. I'll keep saying it the rest of my life," Clara said, "so you'd best get used to it." And that stopped them both, the words hanging there. The rest of my life said plain out loud. The third thing decided quiet between them, and this one, neither of them took back. Prentice came Friday for his money, and found a federal marshal waiting on the porch instead, with the Denver ruling in hand, and he took one look at it, and got very pale, and very quiet, and got back on his coach, and left the valley, and no one in that valley ever saw a man in a town suit come to steal a widow's land again. And that was the end of it. Not with a gunfight, not with a fire, with a piece of paper beaten by a better piece of paper, and a whole valley made whole. The summer turned the way summers do, though neither of them ever spoke of the seasons. The valley healed slower than a season, and faster than either of them expected. The forged notes were voided one by one. The lost acres came back to the families that had lost them. Mrs. Hensley's boarding house was rebuilt. Alder's hands on every board of the new kitchen, better than the old, with a good wide window over the sink. And the old woman told anyone who'd listen that she could see clear to the mountains from it now, and that she'd earned that window, she'd earned it with the truth. Ned served his time and came out, and to everyone's surprise, stayed in the valley and went straight, and more than one person said it was because Alder had given him the chance to walk away twice when he might have hanged, and a man remembers a thing like that. Thomas Crowley was convicted in a Denver courtroom on 11 counts of land fraud, and he smiled through every day of it. And Clara heard he was smiling still when they led him off to the federal prison, and she thought about that. Sometimes the man who never broke, who'd do it all again, who bet his whole life that people don't change. She'd stopped hating him. You couldn't rightly hate a man that empty. You could only be grateful you weren't him and go on being the other kind, the changing kind, the kind he never believed in. Ellen went back east to her family, but she wrote now freely, no longer afraid, and the letters came all through the fall, one for Alder every month without fail, always with a line at the bottom, in a child's careful hand, from the boy named Alder, who was learning his letters and wanted the man he was named for to know it. And Clara and Alder built their life the way he'd fixed her fence that first dawn, wholly without hurry, giving all of themselves to the small daily things, as if the small things mattered as much as anything ever had, because they'd both learned the hard way that they did. He never got over the wonder of it. That was the thing Clara loved most in the long years after. He never once took it for granted, never once woke up and forgot to be amazed that a door had opened to him and stayed open. Every evening when he came in from the high pastures he still guided folks through the passes, still knew the mountains better than any man alive. He'd only stopped owning a piece of them. Every evening he'd come through the low door, ducking under the beam that didn't care how big he was. And he'd find her there, and something would cross his face, that same startled gratitude she'd seen the very first night, as if he still couldn't quite believe she'd be there again. "You look surprised," she'd tease him years in. "Every night, like you expect the house to be empty." "I spent 38 years expecting every house to be empty," he'd say. "It's a hard habit to break. And anyway," that slow, worn smile, less out of practice now, but never gone entirely. "I'd rather be surprised by you every night of my life than get so used to you I stopped seeing you. Man ought to keep seeing the thing that saved him, else he forgets he was ever drowning." And Clara would put her hand against that weathered face the way she had at the well, and think of the rifle she'd held that first rainy midnight, and the door she'd very nearly not opened, and how the whole of her life had turned on the hinge of a single hard decision to trust a shaking stranger in the dark. They didn't grow rich. The railroad came, and the valley's land grew valuable, just as Crowley had schemed it would. But they didn't sell, and they didn't speculate. They kept their patch of ground, and they kept it well, and that was riches enough. Clara went back to teaching the children of the valley, came to her one-room lessons, the settlement children Alder guided through the passes, the sons and daughters of the very families who'd once crossed the street from him, and she taught them their letters and their sums, and without ever saying so, taught them the one lesson she'd learned latest and hardest, that you cannot know a person by the story a frightened town tells about them, and that the strongest hearts are so often the ones that have been hurt the most, and that the bravest thing a body can do is open a door they've every good reason to keep shut. The garden grew back. That was Alder's doing mostly. He who'd lived 38 years off what he could hunt and forage turned out to have gentle hands for growing things, and he coaxed life out of Clara's dead plot, the same patient way he'd coaxed the leather washer into her pump, and by the second summer it fed them and half the neighbors besides. He said once, kneeling in the dirt of it with soil on his big hands, that he'd never in his life planted a thing before, because you didn't plant when you didn't mean to stay, and Clara had to go inside so he wouldn't see her cry over a row of beans, and the cabin that had been falling down around her ears the night he came, the leaking roof, the leaning barn, the broken. Everything became board by board, and year by year, under those enormous careful hands, the warmest home in the whole Montana Valley. Folks came to it now. That was the strangest and best change of all. The place that had been the widow Whitmore's lonely falling down ranch, the place decent people warned each other about because the monster had taken up there. That place became in the years after the place folks came. For help with a birth or a death or a wall that wouldn't stand. For a meal when they were hungry, and a bed when they were caught out. For the quiet, certain knowledge that whoever knocked on that door, whatever hour, however hard their luck or bad their name, the door would open. Because the two people inside it had learned the hard way exactly what it cost to be left standing in the rain. Alder Hayes lived out his days a large, quiet man that the whole valley came in time not to fear, but to lean on. And if a stranger passing through ever heard the old story, the one about the monster of the mountains, and looked at the gentle giant fixing a neighbor's fence and couldn't make the two men fit together, well, one of the old-timers would set them straight. That's no monster, they'd say. That's the best man in this valley, and there was a time we were all too frightened and too foolish to see it. And it took a stubborn widow and an old woman's truth and a girl who wouldn't quit to make us look. But we looked. We looked at last, and we saw. And thank God we did. He was buried when his long life was done on the patch of ground that bore his name, beside the woman who'd opened the door and their marker. The one Clara had cut long before her own name went under it. Bore no dates and no epitaph of scripture. Only the words she'd chosen and he'd wept over when she showed him the truest thing either of them ever knew. They were the two the world threw away. They kept each other. And that is the whole of it. The mountain man who was feared by everyone, and the lonely woman who opened her door, and the valley that learned too late, and just in time that a person is never the story told about them in the dark. Only ever the choice they make when someone knocks hurt and afraid, and out of anywhere else to go, and asks without asking only to be let in from the rain.